This is Jocko podcast number 308 with Echo Charles and me, Jocko Willing. Good evening, Echo.
Good evening.
So tonight, at long last, we are going to wrap up what has ended up being a 6-part series. I got a little out of control, didn't I?
Well,
I kind of got a little out of control in this one.
Well, how not to do it cannot be overstated.
How not to do it cannot be overstated. Just explain that.
Means like, if there are little tips how not to do something, let's face it, the value is what I call infinite. It's infinite.
Check. Good point. The book is called On the Psychology of Military Incompetence. We started on 303, podcast 303, 304, 305, 306, 307. That's a lot of podcasts. This is the winner.
Yeah.
Most number of podcasts on a single book. If you haven't listened to those, you can go back. I actually will say this. In preparing this one, if you haven't listened to those, you don't even have to go back. You can listen to this one. There might be a couple references, but they're not super. You'll be able to get through them. And this section that we're about to cover kind of starts with the crux of the book. But again, when I started reading this book a couple of years ago, maybe it was a year ago. Maybe it was a couple of years ago. Actually, I forget when I got this book. But I knew it was going to take a while. I didn't know it was going to take this long. But here we are. I apologize for taking so long.
No, you did good.
Like you said, though, when you understand how not to do something and you understand what the pitfalls are and the mistakes you can make and the traps. These things are all traps.
Yeah.
They're all traps. And when you start to be able to see the traps, it helps a person a lot. It doesn't make them not go into the traps. That's the whole point. That's one of the whole points of this book is people know that this is a trap and they walk right into it. They just can't even help themselves. Like, remember the whole name dropping thing that he talked about?
Yes, sir.
I forget which one it was, but name dropping, everybody knows it looks whack and they still do it. They can't control themselves.
It's hard, yeah.
Well, let me rephrase that. An arrogant, egotistical person that's nervous about how they look, they're going to name drop even though they know it looks bad, even though they'll point at someone else and say, oh, listen to Carrie name dropping over there. Yeah. They'll do that and then they'll name drop. They'll go, hey, I see Carrie was name dropping over here. Did you see him name dropping me? I was talking to Joe Rogan the other day. You know what I'm saying? Yes, that's how whack people are. Yes, that's how we get stuck in lame situations. Yeah. So the crux of this book is actually the chapter that we're going to start with right now. Dave Burke couldn't make it, by the way.
Good deal, Dave.
Working, busy. The chapter here is called authoritarianism. And this is kind of the crux. And this is what we need to watch out for. Well, this is what we need to watch out for, this authoritarian mindset. Look, do you need to watch out for it as a nation? Yes, you better, especially as things start getting imposed on your life. Because that slides into authoritarianism, and that's a slippery slope. And I know you're going to bring up the slippery slope fallacy.
Well,
I see it in your eyes.
Well, again, and I'll say that I said it before, where there is such thing as a slippery slope, and there is such thing as a slippery slope fallacy. They're not like one doesn't,
They both exist.
They both exist, exactly right.
So authoritarianism in our minds, we have to watch out for it. In our teams, as leaders, we have to watch out for it. And yes, as human beings living in whatever country you live in, you need to watch out for that authoritarianism, because it's a thing that once it starts to take hold, the authoritarian, it snowballs. Yeah. Like, I get a little bit of control. Authoritarian people, when they get a little bit of control, they want more control. Yeah. And then they get a little bit more, they want even more. And they don't stop. Yeah. And it's a psychopathology that they have, that they can't contain it. So here we go. Authoritarianism. In discussing military organizations, it was suggested that a symbiotic relationship exists between certain characteristics of armed services and the private needs of the individual members. So what that's saying is, when you go in the military, there's certain needs that certain people have, certain psychological needs that people have, that going in the military satisfies those needs. For instance, here's an example of where this is a bad thing. I like to rule over people. Right. I know if I become an officer in the military, I'll be able to rule over those privates. Right. So it sort of satisfies that to me. So there's a nice relationship I have. I want to be an authoritarian. This puts me in an authoritarian position. I love it. Is this true of all military people? No, it's not. Continue on. Emphasis was laid upon the central role in this relationship of anxiety, that insidious motivator of much human behavior. In the military mind, it was pointed out, anxiety has many sources: fear of death and mutilation, fear of suppression, fear of failure and social disapproval, fear of public disgrace, and underlying all that, fear of total disorder, which is inseparable product of unleashing normally tabooed instinctual forces. So if you're a person that doesn't like disorder, you look at the military and go, that looks pretty good. You got to go to bed at a certain time. All these people will listen to me. We get to follow orders. They're going to tell me what to do. Everyone's going to listen to when I tell them what to do. That's you. If you don't like disorder, that's a great place to be. Until what happens? The lair of total disorder on planet Earth opens its jaws, and that is combat. So now you're a person that doesn't like disorder, and for your job, at the moment of truth, you are thrust into the jaws of the highest level of disorder in the world. That is combat. And that's why that's what this book is about. This psychology of military incompetence is because people that like order and join the military because they like order, and then their actual job, look, part of their job is marching around a parade field and inspecting uniforms and keeping everything squared away. That's great. But when that homie shows up and shit's getting crazy, they lose their minds. So when you're judging, and you're thinking, I wonder if that bad guy would be a good military officer. They're highly disciplined. They're highly disciplined. They follow orders. They're authoritarian. They seem like they'd be great. You need to remember, what's that person going to do when things get wild? And they're going to get wild. Continuing on. Finally, it was suggested, and you can see where this whole book, that crux, that's why I said this is the crux of the book. That crux right there is why this is so fascinating to me. Because I've seen this throughout my career. People that were squared away, people that were highly disciplined, people that were loved for things to be in order. And when things weren't going right or things were getting wild, they'd lose their minds. And by the way, if they never got put into a situation where things got wild, they're getting promoted, by the way. They're getting promoted because they're the most ordered. They kept the tightest reins on their troops. Back to the book. Finally, it was suggested that a special predisposition toward these several sorts of anxiety may be present in some people as a result of their early childhood. Again, this is where, and somebody pointed this out to me on one of the YouTube comments, the word I was looking for was psychobabble. Psychobabble. Because, again, this guy was a psychologist, so he ties all this stuff into weird Freudian freaking childhood experiences, and I can't back any of that up. I don't know about any of that. What I do know is this. People have different personalities. Where those personalities came from, I don't really know, and I actually don't care. You show up to a SEAL team, your personality is that, whatever your personality is, and that's great. That's fine. I don't care where it came from. If you're hyper ordered and you can't stand it when things get wild, you're not going to be a good SEAL officer or a good SEAL leader. If you're totally rebellious and you can't fall into line ever, well, that's too far in the other direction, and now you can't control anything. You can't control yourself. So we want to find somebody that balances that dichotomy. But whether it comes from early childhood and the way you were potty trained and all this kind of psychobabble, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. We'll have to ask Jordan B. Peterson, name drop, about that one.
Yes, sir.
Such people may well be drawn towards military organizations because the latter have, of necessity, perfected devices like bullshit and discipline and hierarchical command structures and rigid conventions, which not only allow aggression without anxiety, but also reduce anxiety that may have originated much earlier period of life. Okay. Again, a little bit psychoanalysis too much for me. It's a bummer because, as I've said many times, Jordan Peterson made me start to think maybe psychology was sort of a real thing. This is kind of drawing me back in the other direction. Sorry, psychologist. Somebody went. I was reading YouTube comments, and somebody was telling me that much of what Freud said was actually right, but he's just been so hammered by his reputation because he was a cocaine fiend. And that now we kind of disperse or dispatch everything that he said. So maybe I was a little hard on him. I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, if you're doing a lot of cocaine like that and you're prescribing it to a bunch of people and you're lying about who's getting cured, I kind of take a lot of what you said and throw it out the window.
Well, that's a bias too, right?
Cocaine addiction is yes, that's my bias. I'm biased against people that are addicted to cocaine.
No, it's not. Sorry, it's not a bias. It's a logical fallacy. I don't know if you're committing this logical fallacy, but it's the I forget what it is, but the example is like, oh, why would you listen to Fred? Fred doesn't even have a job. So it's kind of like.
Okay.
It's like
I think I am committing that. Like, I'm kind of like, why would you listen to Freud?
I know
Freud's addicted to cocaine.
Yeah. Hey, look, I'm not
lying to people.
I'm not saying you're making the bad decision or nothing like that. I'm saying from a logical standpoint, it's technically a fallacy. It's like, okay, that means if you do cocaine, everything else you say is incorrect.
Okay.
Is that what that means?
Yep.
From a logical standpoint.
Yep. You're right. Okay. Well, I'll concede that. That's what I am conceding.
Bruh.
Freud was right part of the time.
Give Freud his props.
On some of the stuff. Yeah. As he was snorting
just
cocaine. In light of all this, it is encouraging to encounter a substantial body of research which not only provides support for the thesis, but also fills in many of the gaps. It is that on the authoritarian personality. And then they get into this massive section about the authoritarian personality, which I'm not covering the whole thing because I've already spent 6 freaking podcasts on this book, which is all good. But I'm going to do a little bit of it. For the impetus behind the study of authoritarianism, we have to thank the founders and proponents of the Third Reich. Who was presented to the world a phenomenon the like of which has never been seen before since the systematic bureaucratized murder of 6 million Jews. To the inquiring mind, anti-Semitism on this scale would seem to demand at the very least some explanation. For a group of researchers at Frankfurt and later at Berkeley, California, the fact that human prejudice could assume such monstrous proportions suggested the possibility of a particular personality type being implicated in the perpetration of these dark events. So basically, he's saying, look, the Nazis were psycho. Where did their personality come from? What type of people had that personality? And then he goes into a Nazi psychologist whose name was Jensch, something like that. Jensch, I don't know. Sorry there, you Nazi bastard, from mispronouncing your name. So he broke it down, and there was S-types, which S-types at the high end could have something called synesthesia. Have you ever heard of synesthesia before? Synesthesia. This is a very interesting story. So synesthesia. Seth Stone. He could memorize any number immediately. So if he met like a female in a bar, he would say, "What's your number?" And they would say it, and he would immediately know it.
Hell yeah.
And then he was really good at weird math problems, and he could memorize dates. And one day we were talking because it was enough. It was noticeable enough how good he was at it that you think to yourself, there's something a little different. That's really weird how he could memorize this stuff. So he said to me one day, he goes, this is kind of weird, but when I see numbers, I don't see a number. I see a color. And it has like a texture to it. Yeah. And I was like, okay, bro. Yeah. I mean, if we were in the military, I'd think you were maybe on some LSD or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I said, what do you mean? He says, well, for me, and he described the colors and textures of each number. Yeah. So the only ones I remember was that 0 was like hollow. Mm. He said 0 was hollow. Mm. It's not there. 1 was white. And the other one I remember is 7 was yellow. And the reason I remember that one is because I have 2 7s in my phone number. And the first time I asked him I said, say my phone number in colors. And he was like, yellow, yellow, hollow, yellow, and I have 2 7s. And I said, I go, 7 yellow? He goes, yeah. So it was just weird. He had no idea why this was the situation.
Huh. That's crazy.
So one day I'm in a bookstore, and this is, kind of a day when you wouldn't just go on a website to buy your books. I'm in a bookstore, and I see numbers on a cover of a book, and they're all colored and textured. And I was that's weird. And I walk over and I pick it up and I start looking through it, and it says, "Oh, this book is about a person that had synesthesia." Huh. And so I look it up. Synesthesia is a thing where you have multiple modes of interpreting information. Yeah. So, for instance, numbers have colors. They can have letters can have colors, but that's the way Seth thought. Yeah. And so for this Nazi, Jensch, that was kind of the far end of this kind of wild creative thing, this kind of wild creative person. Here it says, to have subjective experiences in one modality when receiving stimulation in another. This is the kind of wildest brain that you can get. And so this Nazi guy, this is the S type. These are people that are S types. Doesn't mean they necessarily have synesthesia, but they're leaning in that direction. And this quote has the liberal in his views, eccentric behavior, also weak, effeminate, and prone to heretical belief that people are largely shaped by their environment and education. Again, this is from a Nazi psychologist, which, I mean, if we're not listening to Freud, we're certainly not listening to this Nazi dude. So, but he's breaking it down into two types, the S type, and then the other type is the J type. And according to this guy, the J type were, quote, good types that would make good Nazis. Amongst their sterling qualities were purity in perception and the sure knowledge that human behavior is determined by blood, soil, and national tradition. Hence, freaking Nazis. The J type, so the Nazi type, would be a he-man, hard and tough, a man you could rely on. These qualities would, he said, have been handed down by a long line of North German ancestors. So, this is what the Nazi says, and it's kind of funny because Seth Stone was about as hard of a bastard as you could ever know, and certainly a he-man individual as well, and a warrior, the big freaking Viking warrior. I texted his mom the other day. I was like, "Yeah, thanks for letting me hang out with that freaking savage Viking kid of yours." So now we go to the Berkeley study. So we just did the Nazi study, who got these two different types, the S type, which is sort of the liberal, sort of effeminate type, and then the J type, which is more of the conservative, hardcore type. Then the American researchers later, going back to the book, also found two contrasting personality types, and these were very like those described by Jensch. Needless to say, they evaluated them rather differently. The one that corresponded to the J type, they called the authoritarian personality. Such a person was anti-Semitic, rigid, intolerant of ambiguity. Again, think about this. If you're intolerant of ambiguity, think of how you're going to perform in combat. You're going to be great in the military, in the rear of the military, because you don't like ambiguity. As soon as you're in combat and you don't exactly know what's happening, you got to make a decision, you're going to hate it. So, intolerant of ambiguity and hostile to people or groups racially different from himself. By the same token, the polar opposite to this type, Jensch, contemptible anti-type, was individualistic, tolerant, democratic, unprejudiced, and egalitarian. So you've got these two different personalities. The Nazis called the bad one good, and the Berkeley people called the good one bad. So you get, however you want to break that down. Their test provided measures of anti-Semitism, ethnocentrism, political and economic conservatism, and implicit anti-democratic trends or potentiality for fascism, which they called the F scale. Like, what is your potential of becoming a fascist? Mm-hmm. This, much of which is based on by actual utterances by the Nazis measured an individual's predisposition towards. So this is what the F type, if you have a tendency where you could become a fascist. Conventionalism, i.e. rigid adherence to conventional middle-class values. Authoritarian submission. a submissive, uncritical attitude toward the idealized moral authorities of the group which he identifies himself. And that's what's kind of crazy, right? You would think that authoritarians you'd be hard to control, but if they're part of that group, they're in the game.
Yeah.
You know, so that's why like the young officer in the military, that he's totally down. He's saluting with utmost vigor because he's part of that system and he's on board. He's submissive to the system. Authoritarian aggression, i.e. a tendency to be on the lookout for and to condemn, reject, and punish people who violate conventional values. It's kind of weird how there's, like right now, you've got Antifa, who's supposed to be sort of like the wild anti-fascist, who's actually totally on board with what I'm saying right now, as they're off the charts on the F scale.
Yeah. So like this, I don't know if this F scale would reflect this specifically or accurately, but essentially you have like two sides, right? One is real conventional, right? They're probably I don't know, but they're probably going to ignore exceptions, you know, the value of exceptions and nuance and all this stuff, right? They're going to tend to ignore it, right? Then you have the other side who probably overvalue nuance and exceptions, kind of like, hey, if there's these exceptions, that must be just as equal as the rule. Because, you know, you kind of look at the individual, you know. So that Antifa analogy is absolutely correct. They're doing the exact same thing. They just reversed it, you know. So it's
flipped.
Yeah, you gotta kind of, I don't know. Back in the day, it seems like everyone was way more just in the middle.
Well,
you know?
balance is what we lose, and what you want. Even on these two things, do you want to be a fascist? No, but do you want to be crazy, uncontrollable? No, you want to be balanced.
Yeah. Yeah, and even just valuing like the group, and then on the other hand, valuing the individual. It's like you got to value both of those things.
Value both those things. Yeah, 100%. Next one, anti-introception, i.e., opposition to the subjective, the imaginative, and the tender-minded. Superstition and stereotype, power and toughness. Preoccupation with the dominant, submission, strong, weak, leader, follower dimension, identification with power figures, overemphasis on conventional attributes of the ego, exaggerated assertion of strength and toughness. So how much of that is important? Like, you know, that's putting you out there on that F scale a little bit. I'm starting to drift, man. Starting to drift. Destructiveness and cynicism. Generalized hostility, vilification of the human. So, you know, obviously a lot of this was focused around, hey, the Nazis and where the Nazis came from. Part of that F thing is they can look at humans and be like, whatever, they don't matter. Projectivity, the belief that wild and dangerous things go on in the world, the projection outwards of unconscious emotional impulses. Puritanical, an exaggerated concern with sexual goings on. So you got these two personality types. Another little note here: these torturous machinations of the authoritarian mind ramify yet further. Because he has to deny his own shortcomings, he dare not look inward. He is fearful of insight and strenuously avoids questioning his own motives. Again, this is when people they're not real confident with themselves, so they project and look at everyone else. Similarly, the authoritarian personality is intolerant of ambivalence and ambiguity. We already hit that. Just as he cannot harbor negative and positive feelings for the same person, but must dichotomize reality into loved people versus hated people. So that's restating what you said. Because what should you be able to do? You should be able to look at Echo and be like, you know what? I like that Echo's, you know, he's pretty nice, but also he can get a little bit lazy sometimes. But overall, you know, we're good.
Kind of cryptic, I guess. Right?
Messages, whatever.
Not so cryptic.
Right? But for me to say, Echo's nice, but freaking he's lazy, I can't stand him. Right? And then you can start looking from one individual to look to a whole group of people, as you said. And I start looking at a group of people and just saying, well, that group of people is bad. Right. Did I just do that with Antifa? I just kind of
you implied it.
I implied, yeah. Sorry, Antifa. I need to be a little bit more open-minded to your individuals.
Yeah, they're one of those groups that their current public-facing persona not that hot.
Yeah. There's another 9-year research that took place, published a decade after the Berkeley research, and this is something that I've been focused on a lot, and it's the open and closed mind, centered on the problem of an individual's capacity to absorb fresh information. Humanity, it seems, varies considerably in this respect, and God, that is true. So this guy, his name is Rockich, something like this, and he did the study. He started breaking down the open and the closed mind. Some people have open minds, some people have closed minds. And I actually think that this is even kind of trumps the F. What was it? The F
scale.
The F scale. I think this trumps the F scale. How much can someone's mind open? How much can it close? And I've been talking a lot about this from a leadership perspective because it is, to me, what we have to fight all the time. Our minds are constantly trying to close and be defensive and take care of themselves and not allow any other ideas in. And what we have to do as people and as leaders is constantly pull your mind open, constantly accept other people's ideas. Doesn't mean you have to think that they're right, but you have to listen to them and assess them in an honest way. And what we have been doing a lot of as a society is just closing our minds to everyone else's ideas, and we don't want to hear what their perspective is because we think we're right. And if you do that as a leader, you come to me with a viewpoint on my plan and I don't open my mind to your viewpoint, I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Goes on here. Humanity, it seems, varies considerably in this respect. At the one extreme are open minds, ready and willing to entertain new facts, even if they are incompatible with their previously held attitudes and beliefs. That's what we want. You got to open your mind and be like, hey, you know what? I wouldn't really expect to see those numbers or get that feedback, but there it is. Yeah. And I need to put that in my calculus. At the other end of the scale are closed minds, which, as their name suggests, resolutely resist taking in anything that conflicts with their preconceptions and treasured beliefs. Not very surprisingly, the possession of a closed mind turned out to be yet another aspect of the authoritarian personality.
Is that... Okay, so you can always make it like an analogy to weightlifting for some reason.
Maybe you can, but I'm open to it. Let's hear what you got, homie.
But like, I wonder if that's like a how like by nature, like the human body and brain is kind of for lack of a better term, it's lazy. Yep. It's conserving like energy all the time. Yep. Like, so even like lifting weights, when you lift weights, your body's response to lifting weights is just a laziness mechanism. It's so that your body's basically saying, oh shoot, that was kind of hard. What do we got to do at home in the body to make it a little bit easier next time? And then it adapts and gets bigger and stronger, whatever. So it's kind of like a weird, like I said, laziness, lack of a better term, mechanism. So like when you have a closed mind, it's kind of like, hey, I already learned that. Like, don't give me some more stuff I got to learn, 100%. Kind of thing. So then it's easier, like, because it's all mental, it's not physical. So you just kind of resist against it,
And you can see where this ties into everything that I have talked about from a leadership perspective for my entire life, which is humility. Yeah. Because if you're humble, your mind is open. If you're arrogant, your mind is closed. Yeah. You think you know everything. You don't need to hear anything else. You're not going to make any adaptations.
Yeah, when you see that little system, it kind of makes sense.
It makes so much sense.
Right, especially go back to the weightlifting. Like, you give your body some
definitely go back
workout,
to the weightlifting here.
Bro, the next day, bro, you get that DOMS, bro, you don't like that stuff. Like, I remember when I was little, I'd do some push-ups, right, thinking I'm all cool or whatever, do some push-ups. The next day, I'm like, so I didn't know about DOMS that much. And, bro, that's a terrible feeling. So it's like, bro, I'm not doing that anymore. Or at the very least, in the inside of my body's like, hey, we got to do something easier or make it so it's easier next time that happens. So from a mental standpoint, it makes sense where, bro, that, what do you call it? The fucking, you talked about it last, the cognitive dissonance or whatever. Yeah. That is DOMS for your mind, essentially. Or maybe the precursor to DOMS. I don't know. It's one of those things. I'm just saying it makes sense because that hurts. You know, when you get that new stuff. Bro, I don't want that new stuff. I'm good with this old stuff.
Closed mind.
Yeah.
He says here, before leaving this section on authoritarianism, there are several other research findings which are pertinent to our present thesis. One of these shows the relationship between conformity, authoritarianism, and the tendency to yield to group pressures. An extreme example of this pattern is the phenomenon of the participation in a lynch mob, where the naturally conformist individual happily yields to group pressure for the perpetration of a criminally aggressive act which, though wholly at variance with the ethos of the wider society, accords with his own narrow self-interest. So again, it's counterintuitive to think that someone that's authoritarian is going to be more apt to go with the group. Yeah. Another finding concerns the effect of authoritarianism upon problem solving in a group situation. And I love this one because, again, I'm thinking of it from a military perspective, and you start thinking, now you got this authoritarian in command, how are they at problem solving? Well, let's go to the book. From their research, W. Haythorne and his colleagues concluded that equalitarian subjects, i.e. those low on authoritarianism, were apparently more effective in dealing with a task and problem than were authoritarian. So that open mind is way better for problem solving. Seems obvious, but this was reflected in higher ratings of effective intelligence, leadership, and goal striving. On the sorts of leaders who emerged in the group situation, they had this to say: emergent leaders in the low F groups were more sensitive to others, more effective leaders, more prone to making suggestions for action subject to group sanction, and less likely to give direct orders to others. This is insane how much this matches everything I've been talking about. Mm-hmm. A conclusion, incidentally, which accords with the observation that authoritarians are less able to appreciate the effect they have upon others and may well think themselves more liked and popular than they really are. I'm chuckling as I think of my military career and people that thought that they were super popular and everyone hated them. Even people attracted to a career in an authoritarian organization, i.e. the military, have been found to prefer leaders who score low on tests of authoritarianism, presumably because authoritarians are less sensitive to the needs of others. So even when you're kind of authoritarian yourself and you joined the military, when you get asked about what type of leader you like, guess what? You actually like less authoritarian leaders because they listen, they treat you with respect, their minds are open. So this is the best way to lead across the board.
Skyscrapers here in San Diego, California. I'm sure it's like this everywhere. I'm not an engineer. You know that. But from what I understand, so think of a tall building, right? It's tall. So that thing better be strong, right? To hold itself up. But tall buildings aren't made rigidly. They're made with a little bit of flimsiness on purpose to absorb movement, the various movements and vibrations that may or may not come about. See what I'm saying? So it's essentially the same thing. On the surface, you think, authoritarianism, that's the way. You can't destroy it. You can't break it or nothing like that. But, bro, that's not how it works. If you're too rigid, bro, you're just going to crumble when the wiggles start coming, when the earthquake starts coming, Again, this is why humility is the most important aspect or characteristic for a leader. Because when you're humble, you're able to move a little bit. You're able to take on new ideas. You're able to sway when the earthquake comes and make adjustments. You're not just crumbling and falling down. Yes, sir. It cannot be stressed too strongly that in talking about authoritarianism, we have been discussing people towards one end of a continuum. This is important because this is a dichotomy. This guy couldn't quite put that. He couldn't grasp that concept like your boy right here did. Yes, sir.
Because you got to balance that dichotomy. But here's what he says: between this end and the other can be found people with all shades of opinion on the various attitudes measured. The general point is this: when discussing authoritarianism, no value judgment is intended. Few would dispute that, in moderation, many of the traits which make up the authoritarian personality have value in society. Civilization requires that there be some repression of sex and aggression, some exercise of discipline, and a modicum of conformity and orderliness. So there's aspects of that personality which are good, and that's true in the military. In fact, the military got a little bit extra. Because you got to be a little bit more conformist, because you got to get you got to be on board. But it attracts people that are too much.
Yeah.
A little bit fast forward here. In other respects, however, the likelihood of Above average levels of authoritarianism in military personnel may well contribute toward incompetence, particularly when the authoritarian has reached a level of command where flexibility and an open mind are mandatory for success. To be more specific, the personality traits of authoritarianism and the associated characteristics of the closed mind and obsessive character may contribute to incompetence in the following ways. 1. Since authoritarians have been found to be more dishonest, more irresponsible, more untrustworthy, more socially conforming, more suspicious than non-authoritarians, they are unlikely to make successful social leaders. Authoritarians will be less likely to understand enemy intentions. I never thought of that before, actually. Here's something new for Jocko. Mm-hmm. If you're authoritarian, you're less likely to understand what the enemy's doing because you can't even understand their perspective.
Yeah.
And to act upon information regarding such intentions as conflict with the beliefs and preconceptions which the commander might hold.
That makes sense. So, okay, forgive me for all the analogies, by the way. I'm just realizing.
What do you got this time?
You're talking about this stuff.
Buildings.
Yeah, okay, so now this time is cameras.
You're 0 for 2.
Or photograph, whatever. Not even, I'm 2 for 2. Though they were accurate. These lessons are everywhere.
Okay, perception is different amongst people.
All right. We'll consider a camera, right? Or a photograph or whatever, right? You have high resolution, low resolution kind of a situation. So the authoritarianism seems like a low resolution scenario. Okay. Way more black and white. Way more like, oh yeah, like freaking either it's this way, and if it's not this way, then it's obvious the other way.
Yep.
But you get a high res photo, it's like, that's just black. Obviously, no, just look closer. It's kind of gray. It's actually pretty dark gray. And then even within that gray, there's darker and lighter shades of gray.
Or even colors.
Or colors. What have you? This one might be orange. This one might be salmon, which is a color, by the way.
Eggshell.
You know what I'm saying? Eggshell, right, with Romalian type. By the way, what's that from? American Psycho. No. But see what I'm saying though, where you get a low res situation. They don't get it. They don't know. And then you said they don't know what the enemy's thinking. Yeah, because they see black, but the enemy's not on black. They're over here on freaking 88% gray. Yeah, exactly right. So yeah, that's just the way it's working. See what I'm saying? So you got to be. Well, I'm not saying you got to be. I'm just saying it might be, as the book is demonstrating, more effective
to have a more nuanced perception of what's happening.
Some high res scenarios going.
In 1954, American research showed that people with a high score on tests of authoritarianism had greater difficulty than non-authoritarians in recognizing threatening messages when these were presented visually. A year later, another study confirmed this finding with threatening words that were heard instead of seen. So someone that's authoritarian, they just don't comprehend the world accurately. That is now your metaphor just became more ample in that right there.
Yeah.
They can't see as well. They can't see as clear. They can't see the nuance. They can't see the message.
Yeah.
3, the inability to sacrifice cherished traditions and accept technical innovations. The history of the machine gun, the tank, and the aeroplane contains striking evidence of this disability. In war, an ounce of calculation is worth a ton of intuition. It also saves many lives. Number 4, the underestimation of enemy ability. Number 5, and he's got whole sections about each one of these. That's why you got to buy the book. Number 5, an emphasis upon the importance of blind obedience and loyalty at the expense of initiative and innovation at lower levels of command. So that's just, if you lose that. So if you're in charge of a company of soldiers and your focus is on getting them to be blindly obedient because you're an authoritarian, it's bad. And you're doing it at the expense of having decentralized command. Watch out for that. Got to beware. Number 6, the protection of the reputations of senior commanders and punishment of those in the lower military hierarchy if they voice any opinion, however valuable in itself, implies criticism of those higher up. So they don't want to hear any pushback on anything, which is, again, a stark contrast to what I encourage all the time up and down the chain of command. I want pushback from my team. If my team isn't pushing back, actually, I'm nervous. Now I think I've got blind obedience, which I don't want. Number 7, closely related to the foregoing effects of authoritarianism, is an individual's propensity to blame others for their own shortcomings. This is the opposite of extreme ownership. So the opposite of extreme ownership is authoritarianism blaming other people. Wouldn't it suck if I was reading this book like right now and it just wasn't working? It was all not mashing up. Yeah. All my theories were wrong. Ugh. Number 8, the close relationship between authoritarianism and obsessive traits has also played a significant part in military incompetence. This is a matter which we discussed earlier. Suffice it to say that the worst excesses of bull and the clinging to anachronistic ritual have played not inconsiderable part in holding back the military machine. So when you are hyper obsessed OCD on little things that don't matter, this is not going to help you. Number 9, there's one trait of the authoritarian personality which at first sight may seem to have nothing to do with military incompetence, a belief in supernatural forces. The contrary is in fact the case. As a general issue, since military decisions should not be based upon a proper weighing up of facts, the introduction of metaphysical variables into decision-making necessarily contributes noise, which decreases the probability of decisions being correct. Concern with what the stars foretell or hopes and occasionally fears of the divine intervention constitute prejudices which can bias decisions away from realism and towards wishful fantasies. That's a weird one to me, because you would think that the people that were anti-authoritarianism would be more kind of superstitious, but we didn't run through all the examples. Get all kinds of examples of that. Yeah. All kinds of examples throughout history of people that are authoritarian. I mean, Hitler's a good example because he was all into the occult and all that and superstitious about stuff. Yeah. Number 10, one of the least attractive aspects of the authoritarian personality is his generalized hostility, what the Berkeley researchers called vilification of the human. This was a trait which was manifested to such an extreme degree by members of the Nazi SS that they could commit wholesale murder, not just without guilt or shame, but perhaps most surprisingly, without the slightest evidence of revulsion. And then he says, finally, there is the fact that authoritarianism itself, so damaging to military endeavor, will actually predispose an individual towards entering upon the very career wherein his restricted personality can wreak the most havoc. Because this is what I kind of opened up with saying today. People that have these tendencies are attracted to the military. And he gives the following case study. Case 19, Cecile, yeah. I guess Cecile would be a girl's name, wouldn't it?
Yes, sir.
So Cecil is a male name.
Yes, sir.
More of a British name. I've never met an American dude named Cecil. Have you?
Yes, sir.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I have not.
Just one.
Was he from England?
No. Black
Canadian?
guy. No, black guy.
Cecil.
Yeah.
Okay. Here we go.
Wait, who's Cecil Peoples?
Oh, yeah. He's an actor.
No, isn't that a UFC guy? Cecil Peoples? Some UFC, like commentator or ref, maybe? I think he's a ref.
I'm drawing a blank for some reason.
Cecil Peoples, right? Anyway, Cecil Peoples, shout out.
All right.
If I'm not mistaken, he's a referee.
Early on? Get your phone and Google it, bro.
We gotta do
Seriously. I kind of remember him being, yeah, you might be right.
Might have been a judge.
Maybe he was a judge. Yeah, Maybe. It seemed like he had some weird background in bare knuckle fighting or something, and then kind of got early UFC activities going.
Cecil Cecil Peoples. Cecil Peoples is there he is, black guy. Why we need support? He's a judge. Why we need to support MMA judge Cecil Peoples?
Right on. From what era? What was his background?
The era that I was watching UFC, which is probably like 5 years ago and before. This is the guy that you claim to know? I worked with a guy at American Movers named Cecil. And then there's Cecil Peoples.
All right, check. So here's Cecil R. who's an obsessive neurotic, and I wasn't going to read this thing, but I kind of have to, and I'll tell you why when we get to the end. His IQ was in the bright normal range. Personality testing indicated that he was very dependent on his parents, but that they were seen as being emotionally remote and extremely demanding. In fantasy, he expressed strong feelings of aggression and anger. He seemed most interested in the history of wars and in playing war games. He shot darts with vigor and delight in the therapist's playroom, and if given a choice would choose war games. His parents said he refused to play with other children unless they others did exactly what he told them to do. Cecil said when he grew up, he wanted to be a general. So there you go. That's the kind of personality we don't want joining the military, but that is fired up to join the military. Yeah. Next chapter 23, Mothers of Incompetence. We're going kind of heavy. I'm not going to go too deep into this chapter because it's going a little bit into the psychology world, which again, I think some of the psychology is a little bit outdated. This is coming from me, and I'm no psychologist.
No, sounds like a closed mind scenario.
Okay, we'll open it up. Okay, good point.
Oh, my man.
Right. You caught me. I'm busted. For the reader not previously versed in the psychology of authoritarianism, the preceding chapter may have come as something of a surprise at first sight. The traits of orderliness, tough-mindedness, obedience to authority, punitiveness, and the rest, may have seemed the very embodiment of hard-hitting masculinity, ideally suited to the job of being a soldier. That is an epic statement, right? And that's what so many people think. So many people think that is what we're looking for in the military. Unfortunately, as represented in the authoritarian personality, they are only skin deep, a brittle crust of defenses against feelings of weakness and inadequacy. The authoritarian keeps up his spirits by whistling in the dark. He is frightened. He is the frightened child who wears the armor of a giant. His mind is a door locked and bolted against that which he fears the most himself. I didn't get much out of that, but what I did get a lot out of is the fact that when you hear these personality traits, tough-mindedness, obedience to authority, it sounds like that's what you want your people to be. That's what you want your soldier to be. You don't. It's not what you want. It's not what we're looking for. Fast forward a little bit. Before going on, there's one further point. It concerns the distinction that has been drawn between irrational authoritarianism, as dealt with here, and so-called rational authoritarianism. So this is just a clarification here. By the latter is meant the readiness to accept and obey the dictates of a rational authority. Cool. So Pete, there's such a thing. He's basically making a distinction here. An irrational antipathy toward all authority is evident in some cases of student militancy, may be just as neurotic as non-adaptive as a predisposition toward irrational authoritarianism. The common denominator of irrational authoritarianism and blind anarchy is that both states of mind are compulsive and derive from an underlying ego pathology. In fact, this distinction between rational and irrational authoritarianism has been implied throughout this book. Without the exercise, this is why I had to read this part, without the exercise and acceptance of rational authority, without certain minimal levels of discipline, and even without certain features of bullshit, military organizations would cease to function. This is something I have to talk about sometime with clients at Echelon Front, because decentralized command. We want to have decentralized command, decentralized command, decentralized command. We want subordinates to be able to make choices and make decisions. And occasionally I'll get a group that's going too wild with that. And all of a sudden nothing is centralized anymore. And I have to bring up the fact that, hey, guess what kind of uniform every guy in task unit bruiser wore? A matching uniform. Why? Because we couldn't have some guy that was wearing a pair of blue jeans and a sweatshirt out in Ramadi, because they wouldn't look the same, and therefore they get shot. What happens if I run out of bullets? Guess what? I can get bullets from someone else in the platoon because we're all using the same weapon. What about my radio? I can use my radio, and I can pick up your radio and use it too. Why? Because we're using the same radio. So you have to have some level of centralization, some level of authoritarianism that we're all going to kind of be on the same page. He says, then it is necessary to labor this point because of some of the semantic confusion regarding the term authoritarian. Throughout this book, it refers to irrational authoritarianism. For the so-called rational authoritarianism, we prefer the phrase autocratic behavior. The terms are not synonymous. Whereas the autocrat exercises tight control when the situation demands it, the authoritarian is himself tightly controlled, no matter what the external situation. Little semantics there. He goes in this next chapter, education of the cult of muscular Christianity. Okay. This is where he starts talking about, the British schools, how these kids were raised in sort of like this what he calls muscular Christianity. Not kids, but some of the kids in this time frame were raised this way. Here's some of the things that are highlighted by it. The reasons for this stultifying educational program are no doubt many and various, but two deserve particular consideration. So this is the education program that some of these kids were subjected to. The first resides in the belief that enforced application to unpleasant, boring tasks develops character. And the second, that any truly intellectual exercise, by which is meant the cultivation of independent thinking as opposed to rote learning, harms that fine sense of loyalty and obedience which such schools strive to inculcate. To think is to question, and to question is to have doubts. So he gives some examples of how these kids were raised, what they did at these schools. They were playing sports, they were hazing rituals and memorizing things, and it was all. I mean, this is true to this day. We've got this sort of school system which is meant to teach you to be a good worker. That's what it's meant to do. Meant to teach you to be a good worker. They don't want. That's why they structure things. It's like, hey, some of the stuff that you learn in school has no value whatsoever. They're just trying to get you to follow the rules, do what they say, get on board with the program, fall in line with the authoritarian rulers. Yeah. So we got to be careful of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes you feel like whoever they are doing it on purpose. And sometimes you just feel like, bro, I think this is just some curriculum that no one had the gusto to just be like, hey, we're doing an overhaul.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think that at some point, right now, let's face it, if you were to go ground zero and restart your educational system in America, it'd be totally different than it is right now.
Yeah. Well, it is slowly changing.
It is slowly changing. And I'm not even sure that the way that they're changing it is the right direction. I think they're taking advantage of the fact that it might not have been the best, and they're changing it to make it worse in some cases.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think from a social standpoint, I think they might have went kind of too hard in a certain direction.
Kind of crazy sometimes what kids are learning in school. Disturbing in some cases what kids are learning in school.
Yeah. My only point of reference is the elementary schools that my kids go to.
I got the full spectrum from elementary school through college.
No, man.
I got it all. I've seen it all.
Do you think what was I just thinking about just now?
And I'm not really in support of it.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Do you think I don't know the answer to this, but I do kind of consider the other side of this. You know how you just said the school kind of is structured to provide or to develop good workers, right? Aren't most people workers anyway?
Not necessarily.
No.
You want to know something? What I think is messed up now is I think a lot of times the school right now is to develop people to go to college and feed the academic growth of colleges.
Yeah, but even that.
Hey, we're just trying to get you to get. It'd be good for you to get a degree in freaking basket weaving or whatever, and no one needs a degree in that. There's a lot of degrees that you get that you don't need. If you want to learn about that stuff, go read about it. Don't pay $200,000 and go into debt to learn about something that has it doesn't give you a skill set.
That always felt like a social problem to me. Yeah. It felt like, I don't freaking know.
When I was a kid, not a kid, but when I joined the military, I used to use the term, I don't know if it's ever caught on or I don't know if I've ever heard it, but educational inflation. Because when I was a kid, if you dropped out of high school, you could still get a job and have a normal life. Yeah. Then as I got to high school, it was, hey, listen, you got to finish high school. Right. If you don't finish high school, you can't get a job, blah, blah, blah. Then it was that I joined the military. Thank God I joined the military. But as I joined the military, it was, hey, you really need to really get your whatever, what's a 2-year degree? your associates. You need to get your associates, get some, and then it became bachelor's, and now you got kids that are going to getting their master's and then their doctorate.
Right.
They're 33 years old, 35 years old, 29 years old before they're even getting a job.
Yeah.
And they racked up. I mean, this is all now. It's all common. Like everyone's racking up $400,000, $200,000, $300,000 worth of debt.
Yeah. And
the skill set that they got in whatever degree they got, it gets them a $29,000. No, probably not. Probably a $38,000 a year job as a whatever in a whatever.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas if you would have dropped out of high school and become an apprentice welder. Yeah. Right now, you'd be making $128,000 a year.
Yeah.
Because you're a hard worker. Yeah. And by the way, if you're smart, you start, you figure out that welding thing, and you buy a couple welding machines, and you're like, you know what? I can get 2 guys. I can apprentice them. I can teach them. Boom. You can grow. You can make stuff happen. Meanwhile, the person that has $38,000 a year job, they actually have no skill set.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of the educational system right now is a feeder program for the college system, which is going to charge people money. And this is sort of like the housing crash too. So the housing crash came because the government was loaning money or backing up loans to people that aren't going to be able to afford it. Mm-hmm. That was one of the primary causing of the housing crash. Right now, the government backs up these loans that these people get. And so they're allowed to get loans for $200,000, $300,000. And they don't realize it. They should, but they don't realize that, hey, you know how long it takes to pay off a $300,000 loan, which is, by the way, is the only loan that you can't go bankrupt from. And you're making $39,000 a year. Yes. And by the way, my daughter just graduated college in the spring, and a really good college, and her friends are making $39,000 a year, $42,000 a year. Like, they're not making a lot of money. Yeah. So I think a lot of what used to feed the workers now feeds into this educational nightmare of college debt and loans and all that. Yeah. That's what's kind of nice about what we're doing at Origin, because at Origin, you don't need a college education. You can go get a job and get a skill and have a career.
Right.
And we got people that have careers now that have learned a skill that's a highly valuable skill, and they don't have any debt because they didn't go and study basket weaving for 4 years at $42,000 a year.
Basket weaving always gets a bad rap. Oh, it almost seems
actually like basket weaving would be a better skill than some of the degrees that people are getting. Right?
I would
basket weaving would be a skill. You could sell baskets.
Yeah. But don't you
right.
think
we need to stop harassing basket weavers?
I know, bro. It's almost, but it feels, bro, I don't know. I'm not an economist or nothing like this. You know that. Mm-hmm. It kind of seems like that there's certain times, and then the education is kind of like trying to facilitate those times, right? Then you have people running the education, and then the times change, and then the education just follows up with the change, but just way too late. Like, might even be 50 to 70 years late.
Well, yeah, for
and then
sure.
think. So now think about it. Consider that. So now it changes from like just straight up factory workers to, a little bit more advanced workers types, right? So now it's like, okay, really the change that should have been made a long time ago is for you to be influenced to go to college, get a higher education, right? Because you have higher level jobs. Generally speaking, lower level jobs always going to exist and all this stuff, but just generally speaking, it's just general. So boom, now everyone should be going to college a long time ago. They should be doing that. They want to get a degree. That creates way more opportunities. Back then, there's not all these crazy degrees. Like now, there's plenty of degrees. When I went to college, like they started doing this program called liberal freaking studies, right? Mm-hmm. Which in concept, it's good. The concept is good. But bro, all you got to do is get your little degree approved, and you can just study whatever you want, essentially, and be like, yeah, my degree is in this. As long as the title was approved, you can get it. It's called liberal studies, and then you have a title for it. Again, you start doing it just for the sake of getting a degree, bro. When you get out of college, you could be jammed up.
That's what I just said, bro.
Exactly right. But okay, and that's the later part of it. But so now you have, and when I say it's a social thing, or it feels like a social thing. It's kind of like people are still stuck in that little zone that's like it is beneficial to go to college, because there was a point
they're
where
stuck in that zone. They think that think what are you doing? I'm going to go to college because that's going to put me on the path.
Yeah.
And they don't realize that it's not the path.
That's not the reality right now. So much has changed. And then you have all these people who, like back in the day, you said people can drop out of high school and get a job. Yep. Because you can drop out of high school because all you have to do is know how to read and do basic arithmetic and get a job somewhere, like at a factory or at one of the jobs that were freaking prevalent for those times. As times change, you need a little bit more education now for these jobs.
True and untrue.
Well, there are always exceptions.
Guess what? There is massive jobs that are, carpentry, concrete,
yes, sir,
plumber, electrician, auto mechanic, driver. Like there's all these jobs that you definitely do not need a college education to have.
Yes,
you
sir.
do not need it.
Oh yeah.
And those are awesome jobs, and those people go out and build America. But to your point,
are you talking about right now though?
I'm talking about right now.
Okay,
those jobs fully exist. But here's to your point. A lot of people would say, okay, hey, what should I do with my life? And the first 9 things that come up on their list are go to college, go to college, go to college, go to college. Whereas when I was in high school, maybe the first thing would be go to college, but the second thing was like become an apprentice electrician. Like I took electricity in high school.
And you're saying that was kind of the social kind of influence?
I think that was way more normal. Right. There wasn't the mandatory track to college. And I think nowadays almost every kid is being told go to college, go to college, go to college, instead of saying, hey, you can go and become an apprentice electrician, and that's a freaking great job, and you can have a great life, and you can contribute to society in a massive way doing something you enjoy. Because look, when I was in high school, I didn't want to be looking at books, right? I would much rather be an electrician. Much rather be an electrician.
Yeah, and yeah, I think the zone where, basically break it into these two things, where the social influence, like, hey, you should go to college or you should whatever, or it's okay not to go to college, you can just get a job here, whatever. That passes and changes through time. To me, the social part is lagging, like way behind the reality of it. That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
So there was a little zone where it was the best to go to college if you had that opportunity. That was the zone. And right now, socially, the influence is still in that zone. Yeah. They're still saying, it's starting to change though. You start to hear people being like, hey,
college is a waste of money.
Influential people saying that stuff. Yes, but I think it's still there. The reality on the streets is, college is for a handful of people and that's it.
Yeah. I want to say, there's people out there that are actually hiring. They're not looking for college degrees. Yep. And I'm talking I think Peter Thiel's one of them. Oh, for real. And he's out there saying, we'll test. I don't know if they got a testing program, but they're saying, we just want smart people. It doesn't matter whether you went to college or not. Yep. That's freaking legit.
And here's how you can kind of, it's kind of like a finger on the pulse. Like this is how you can kind of tell that people are still in the zone of like college is a good thing. You can be like, oh yeah, that guy, he has a degree from Harvard. It's like a total appeal to authority. The college being the authority, by the way. You don't even have to say what he has a degree from. Yeah. You can say he has a degree from Harvard. And that automatically, I'm not saying that's it, but I'm just saying that in and of itself is a point. Yeah. Like a positive thing. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
You're right.
When we get past this zone, they'll be like, so? What's it in? What's he doing?
What's funny is I actually hear that right now. I'm starting to... and people that I know for sure are starting to hear like, that person has their MBA or whatever. People like, yeah, whatever. So we're already getting there. We're not getting there, but we're moving in that direction. I hear those comments. Check. Back to education here. Finally, and perhaps the most fatal of all, the private school's ethic of honor and fair play, so admirable in itself, leads to disastrous results when mistakenly imputed to those like Hitler who play the game by different set of rules. So these kids were told, hey, you got to follow the rules and we play with honor. And then Hitler's like, oh, really? Watch this. This particular weakness of military endeavor continued to feature in many subsequent campaigns. Indeed, it is no exaggeration to say that an absence of adequate reconnaissance, the refusal to believe intelligence reports, and a general horror of spying have tended to keep our armies wrapped in cocoons of catastrophic ignorance. This fatal preference for honorable ignorance rather than useful knowledge gleaned by devious means was not confined to soldiers in the field, but as an attitude of mind permeated the highest levels of all military intelligence. So another thing, this is what these kids got educated to do. They got educated to live with honor. That means we're not going to sneak around. We're not going to cheat. I had to watch out for that. Sometimes you'd get the IEDs for cowards. Okay, we get it. That's for cowards. But guess what?
What's for cowards?
IEDs, roadside bombs, booby traps.
Got it.
That's a coward. Yeah, sure, it is. Guess what? We have to contend with it. Yeah. Just because it's cowardly doesn't mean it's going to go away. It doesn't mean it doesn't produce dead bodies and maimed bodies. Is it cowardly? Yes, it is. How do we counter it? So you put some sniper overwatches on some roads and schwack some people. That's how you counter it. Like a reformed, because enormously successful burglar who self-righteously puts down his jemmy to take up proselytizing on the evils of crime, we took to repudiating these very traits, push, cleverness, ruthlessness, and sheer naked aggression that had put us where we are. The reason so what he's saying is, you like a criminal that sort of makes it and all of a sudden puts down his thieving tools and starts saying, thieving is bad and you should live a righteous way. Yeah. But he's forgetting about how he got there. Yeah. And the point he's making here is we can have a tendency to do that. Hey, in war, if you got to be brutal. We're on top because we were brutal. Yeah. We're on top because we spied and broke shit and killed people. That's what got us here. And we can't now sit up here and say, well, that's all wrong.
Right.
You got to be careful about that.
Yeah.
Now we get to part 3 of this book. Well, interestingly enough, you want to hear what quote it starts off? There's no bad regiments, only bad officers. We've heard Napoleon say it. We've heard Hackworth say it.
Yes, sir.
We've heard Echelon Front say it. We know that quote is an extreme ownership. Well, we use a different quote. No bad teams, only bad leaders is what we said. Mm-hmm. Did we steal it? Yes, we stole it from Hackworth. Mm-hmm. Who'd Hackworth steal it from? Field Marshal Lord Slim, who was in World War I, World War II, wounded 3 times. And guess what? He stole it from Napoleon. So we're stealing it. We're using it. Mm-hmm. Can't steal what's free, though, can you? We're attributing. Mm-hmm. Also, too much of history is written as though men had no feelings, no childhood, no bodily senses, which is something that I have tried with all my might with this podcast to make sure that history is written and it's clear that these men had feelings, had bodily senses, had childhoods, and beyond that had hopes and dreams for the future. A lot of history is not written like that. Section here called the worst and the best. So now what he does is he starts pointing out some, and this is why I can start moving a little bit faster. I told you before we even started recording, hey, there's a big chunk of the book we're going to cover in one podcast, because he starts going into a lot of details, and it's worth reading. You have to get the book if you want to read all these things. But he starts pointing out the worst and the best of some of these military leaders. He said this about Hitler, or John Strawson said this about Hitler. In a war from which so much human error had been eliminated by technological advances alone, human error was still the principal factor in determining a war's outcome. Hitler, Slipknot. A little bit about Hitler. Hitler's particular brand of military incompetence is precisely what one would expect. He showed a total unconcern for the physical and psychological welfare of his men and his armies. And when we covered Stalingrad, remember when we covered Stalingrad on this podcast? Actually, a book called Stalingrad, written by a Nazi soldier, and they were listening on the radio as they were surrounded, and they were listening to Hitler talk about praising their dying to the last man. That's insane. Number 2 is this imperviousness to human suffering, which resulted in such enormous wastage of his own forces, was a contributory factor in his stubborn refusal to ever relinquish gained ground. 3 from his extreme ethnocentrism came another well-known form of military incompetence, that which results from a gross underestimation of the enemy and in particular of the ability of civilian populations to withstand the effects of war. Yep. Thinking that your Nazi soldiers are just superior, and then you come up against the Russian civilians and they're like, what? Won't play? And thinking that they're just going to fold. Thinking that the Russians are just the Russian civilian populace and even their Red Army, which is, made up of, peasant soldiers, they're going to fold under the might of the Nazis. You might want to check yourself, homie. While many of Hitler's decisions were military disastrous, his underlying ego weakness and fear of criticism eventually in several other traits which are undesirable, to say the least, in a military senior commander. He promoted his aides and advisors for their sycophancy rather than their ability. Just promoting people because they sucked up to him. He refused to accept, believe, or even to listen to unpalatable intelligence. And when things went really wrong, he was first to find scapegoats, the opposite of extreme ownership. Promoting people because they kissed your ass. Not listening to intel that's coming in. This is having a closed mind. Being an idiot. Like his henchman Himmler, even Hitler could on occasion show that over-control of aggression, that procrastination which has incapacitated some other authoritarian military commanders. Perhaps his most disastrous decision of the war was when he halted the German advance before Dunkirk, thus allowing the British to escape. Finally, on April 22nd, 1945, Hitler failed as a military commander in a way that he had never failed before. In abdicating responsibility, he betrayed his command. And if you're abandoned leadership and duty alike. So, yeah, he quit. He's the ultimate quitter. DOR'd. DOR'd, drop on request on April 22nd, 1945, and then a few days later on April 30th, killed himself. He could also commit enormous blunders, and these, when they occurred, seemed less a product of stupidity than of his total, sustained, all-pervasive authoritarian. So that's an important point. Hitler made all these mistakes and did all this dumb shit, but he wasn't dumb. What was driving that? His
ego.
Yeah, his ego, his psychopathy, his authoritarian nature, all those things. He's not stupid. So you can be really smart and do really dumb things because you're authoritarian, because your ego is out of control, etc. Some good examples. General Sir James Wolfe. He was bitterly and unfashionably opposed to what he called the spirit-breaking tactics of harsh punishment and drill, was quite prepared to disobey orders if these conflicted with what he knew was right. Now, he's just going through these are the opposite of authoritarian personalities. This guy, Sir James Wolfe, I'm going to burn through some of these. At the risk of making himself unpopular, he forced his officers to attend to the welfare of their men, to visit their living quarters, have regard for their health, and generally get to know them as fellow human beings. Wellington, next guy he highlights here. Wellington did not evince signs of emotional restriction, did not remain unmoved by human suffering, did not seek popularity, was unimpressed by bull, and did not seek scapegoats for his military setbacks. This is a good leader. He spurned the decorations of authority, large staffs, sentries, gold braids. So he didn't want to be all dressed up. Wellington's self-confidence is also reflected in his refusal to make scapegoats of others. Thus, of the Burgos fiasco, he said, "I see that a disposition already exists to blame the government for the failure of the siege of Burgos. It was entirely my own act." Thankfully, he didn't put that into a book and call it extreme ownership. Otherwise, I would have been kind of out of luck. Because that's what he did, right? Here's the bad situation that unfolded during this siege, and he took ownership of it. Didn't blame anybody. As usual, after a battle, his mood was set by the losses, not the glory. On the morning after the siege, another Wellington showed himself to his deeply astonished staff. He visited the dead, and on seeing so many of his finest men destroyed, he broke down and wept. That's not authoritarian. Finally, he displayed an open mind to new ideas, quick to innovate and see advantages in the progress of technology. He was remarkably laissez-faire regarding the dress of his soldiers. Thirdly, he did not commit that cardinal error of so many military incompetence, underestimation of the enemy. He took infinite pains in military planning, left nothing to chance, selected officers for their efficiency, always did recon. So you can see what he's getting at here. Shaka, the Zulu king. Of his generalship, it has been written, Shaka's particular genius lay in his meticulous personal attention to detail and sheer hard work. If at all possible, he always insisted on inspecting everything himself. In every one of his critical battles, he insisted on personal reconnoitering the ground and the disposition of enemy forces. He invariably checked all reports by procuring collateral evidence. Shaka could also be humane. He talks about Shaka actually being pretty brutal to his men, which I was a little bit thinking, well, why are you trying to give this guy as this great example? Those who hesitated to follow his example in painful initiation were instantly clubbed to death. It seems a little authoritarian to me, bro.
A little bit, yeah.
Dixon, where you at? Well, I mean, we're cutting some slack here. So here's the deal. Another example of his flexibility and refusal to be dominated by tradition was Shaka's banning of sandals for his fighting men. By making them run barefoot, a considerable and by no means popular break with tradition, he invested his army with the speed of movement far in excess of that achieved by his enemies. The displeasure he incurred through this innovation was hardly reduced by an order to his warriors that they should harden their feet on the parade ground strewn with thorns. Those who hesitated to follow in his example in this painful tradition were instantly clubbed to death. Seems we're being a little authoritarian there, bro. But then it says this, Shaka could also be humane as well as punitive in caring for his army. To ensure that his fighting men were kept warm, well rested, and well fed, an orderly was provided for every 3 soldiers under his command. No battle was fought without adequate supplies of food, water, and bark dressings being assembled at strategic points beforehand. It can be summed up as autocratic, totally non-authoritarian, high in achievement motivation, and yet capable of great warmth and sympathy. According to Ritter, this guy that wrote about him, he was highly emotional and sentimental behind a facade of iron self-discipline. The fact that he was the finest composer of songs, the leading dancer, and wittiest punster suggests an artist who would naturally have a highly strung nature and more sensitive than the common run of the Nyungi race. So there's Shaka. Napoleon. The evidence suggests that though he was ambitious, ruthless, devious, unscrupulous, grandiose, despotic, Machiavellian, dictatorial, and autocratic, he was not authoritarian. Again, this is where he's getting into some semantics here that's kind of like, Napoleon could be the reverse of extra punitive. The fault, he argued, lay not so much with the men as with himself. So he when things didn't go the way he wanted, he often said it was his fault. Cool. I think he's stretching, man, on Napoleon a little bit. Because I think it's a scale, right? And Napoleon, I think, had an open mind when it came to combat, but I think he was an egomaniac. I mean, we have what's that? A Napoleon complex, right? Yeah. Like, you're all little and trying to be big. Yeah. Stern and imperious in his business hours, Napoleon was all ease and sunshine to his intimates. They admired his pleasant wit, his unaffected gaiety, his rich and brilliant handling of moral and political themes. So you're trying to make him out to be a little less authoritarian than he was, in my opinion.
But some of these guys, even the guy Shaka Zulu, he was authoritarian in certain ways.
That's what I just said. It's a scale, right?
Super whatever in other ways.
And it kind of struck a balance.
Yeah. So like back to Shaka, he would be not. What's the opposite of authoritarian? Liberal, whatever.
Yeah, anti-authoritarian.
Anti-authoritarian. He was anti. Mm-hmm. Except when it came to those feet, man. Yeah. Those feet gotta, you gotta, like how you guys say, you gotta hold the line on some stuff. Yep. Those radios, you gotta know how to program your radios.
It's true.
But the patches, that slide a little bit. So Shaka was like that with a lot of stuff.
So me and Shaka kind of keeping it real.
Kind of keeping it real. But that's how, right? That's the dichotomy.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the dichotomy. And I think he's trying to point out some of that dichotomy. I think he's leaning to try and show these good leaders as being less authoritarian.
Yeah. Because Napoleon, I mean, sure, Hitler, Napoleon, these guys, they lost, and they lost huge, and they're bad. But they did some effective stuff.
Oh, yeah. Well, Napoleon won a lot. And Hitler won a lot too, man.
That's what I'm saying.
I mean, Blitzkrieg kicking it off, took over giant swaths of Europe. Napoleon did the same thing. So there was definitely they did some shit that they won.
It was effective.
Yeah. And by the way, there's other people that were totally authoritarian that did authoritarian shit and also won.
Yeah.
The Crimean War, right? With the Brits were doing the dumbest, most horrible authoritarian ego-driven moves and getting guys killed by the bushel, and yet they still were able to win. This is a little bit more about Napoleon. Finally, like many of the other commanders on our list, Napoleon was without that vanity. This struck me, bro. Without that vanity, which betokens a weak ego, was notoriously careless about his dress, had a wide range of intellectual interests, and promoted his subordinates on the basis of their efficiency. Okay, so that's cool. Makes sense. Nor did he display the debilitating over-control of aggression, which has on occasions paralyzed warlike behavior of less successful commanders. Nelson did not display a compulsive concern with orderliness of his dress, was anxious to give pleasure to everyone about him, distinguishing each turn by some act of kindness, and chiefly those who seemed to require it the most. So Nelson seems like he's just a really good guy. Any residual doubts one might have regarding Nelson's freedom from the crippling effects of a weak ego should be resolved by considering his most famous characteristic, disobedience. Possessing boundless moral courage, he was himself prepared to disobey if he thought it to the advantage of his country. And often he was right. Nelson was, in fact, always urging others, even allies, superiors, and officials of the army, to disregard their orders, if necessary, in what he thought was to be the general interest of the cause. This is one of the best quotes on decentralized command I have ever heard in my life. So this is Nelson. Nelson's own view of this matter was uncomplicated. As he said to the Duke of Clarence, "To serve my king and to destroy the French, I consider as the great order of all, from which little ones spring. And if one of these little ones militate against it, for who can exactly tell at a distance, I go back and obey the great order and object." End quote. That's a beautiful understanding of decentralized command. Here's what we're trying to get done. And there's a bunch of different ways you can get it done. If I'm telling you to do something but it doesn't quite make sense in supporting the strategic goal, don't do it. Do something else. So that's a non-authoritarian mindset, which is good to go. T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, of his generalship, Liddell Hart wrote, "Lawrence can bear comparison with Marlborough or Napoleon in that vital faculty of generalship, the power of grasping instantly the picture of the ground and situation, of relating the one to the other and the local to the general." Oh, he was able to see what was happening, not just what's happening right there, but see it in the big picture. He was able to detach, take a step back, look around. Think strategic. Liddell Hart considered that Lawrence also showed the same profound, quote, profound understanding of human nature. The same power of commanding affection while commanding energy, and the same consummate blend of diplomacy with strategy. Had a cool head. Liddell Hart also considered that Lawrence, the most widely read of generals, was more steeped in knowledge of war than any other generals of the last war. In personality, this one read a little bit more because of this. In personality, Lawrence is probably the least authoritarian senior commander the world has ever known. He was totally without personal ambition, refused promotion, honors, and awards for himself, and deplored the pomp, vanities, and ritualized bowing and scraping which one associates with the power structure of the hierarchical command systems. We like this guy, right? Out of the gate, you're like, yeah, we're down with this guy. The fact that he could renounce his name for that of Ross and later Shaw and happily resume his role of a lowly ranker after achieving worldwide fame indicates a degree of self-effacement quite unique amongst military men. Contrary to a characteristic predisposition of authoritarian individuals, Lawrence disliked interfering with other men's freedom. God. You can't impose on other people. You shouldn't impose on other people. You shouldn't mess with their freedom. He disliked giving orders and in fact exercised effective command largely through the tendering of advice. Have you ever heard Leif Babin explain how many times I gave him a direct order?
Yes, I have heard him explain.
What's
how
the
many
number?
times? 0.
0 times.
Yeah.
That this advice was acted upon suggests that by his personality he achieved a level of leadership rarely attained by military commanders. He himself was prepared to obey foolish orders but disliked passing these on to others. As Liddell Hart remarks, in war such orders are often the result in useless sacrifice of men's lives. In peace they often contribute to the sterilization of men's reason. Oh, that's a good one. You bark orders, you make people do what you want them to do, you're going to sterilize their brain. Lawrence was a great respecter of reason and considered that the possession of knowledge was of primary importance for a military leader. In his opinion, quote, the perfect general would know everything in heaven and earth, end quote. By the same token, this most open-minded of men deplored the closed and vacuous minds of his military compatriots, men who displayed a, quote, fundamental crippling incuriousness. So there you go. T.E. Lawrence. We got Slim, who this thing kicked off with. General Slim. Like so many generals when plans have gone wrong. Oh, we're taking a little bit of ownership here. Like so many generals. This is a quote. When plans have gone wrong, I could find plenty of excuses. But only one reason. Myself. When 2 courses of action were open to me, I had not chosen, as a good commander should, the bolder. I had taken counsel of my fears. Patent reference. There is no evidence here of that telltale defense projection, and even though he had ample opportunity for making scapegoats of those subordinates who had given the advice which ended in failure. So you got another guy, Slim. Had he written a book and given it a cool title like Extreme Ownership, we'd be in a different spot right now. Taken into account with other traits, his warmth towards his family, his absence of rigidity, his parsimony with the lives of his men, his ability to improvise, his popularity with the troops, and relative lack of concern regarding his popularity with his equals, it should come as no surprise to learn that this chivalrous, autocratic, and most efficient of generals enjoyed a happy childhood, apparently unmarred by those stresses and strains which may weaken the ego and stunt the personality. I've been skipping these parts a little bit. I guess I'm being a little bit biased, but I'm skipping a lot of the psychoanalysis because that, and I'm just giving you that little taste of them. If you want to get some of that, you got to kind of get into it here a little bit. And this next section is exceptions to the rule. Got a little quote here from Rommel. One must not judge everyone in the world by his qualities as a soldier. Otherwise, we should have no civilization. That's Rommel to his son. Interesting. Incompetence is not confined to those who are extreme in their ineptitude, but may operate along a line of a continuum of military excellence from worst to the best senior commanders. In military shortcomings of Montgomery, Kitchener, and Haig and their positions along a dimension of authoritarianism are perfectly correlated. So this is what you were saying earlier. It's not like, this is you're either authoritarian or you're not. Mm-hmm. You could be anywhere on the spectrum. And as we have been discussing, you want to have some level of authoritarianism. Mm-hmm. You just don't want too much. It's got to be a balance. But some people can be, they're a little bit in the red. Right? Some people full green. Maybe some people too much green. They don't even make it. Yeah. But I think in the military, people that are far green don't even join the military. Yeah. Right? We got to remember that people are not even in there. Yeah. So you already have a composite of people that are a little bit, at least in the middle, maybe a little bit orange, some people leaning in the red. Yeah. But it's a continuum. Talking about Montgomery, and again, you got to get, if you want the details of this, get the book. It's not my purpose to debate Montgomery's greatness. Suffice it to say that while not without blemishes, he was in the main a highly competent commander and as such needs to be considered in present context. Does he or does he not support the hypothesis that competence depends upon an absence of authoritarianism and its associated traits? So that's what we're really hearing there, is that the more authoritarian you are, the worse you're going to be. Unless you have zero authoritarianism. And he points out some things that makes him not authoritarianistic. Here's Montgomery lacked those obsessive traits which tend to accompany authoritarianism. He's not particularly mean or particularly obstinate, and judging from his own dress and lenient attitude towards that of his troops, he did not harbor any compulsive urge for a bull. In this, as in other matters, his approach was essentially realistic. It seems that whatever else he may be, Montgomery does not evince a well-documented signs of authoritarianism. And yet, even in this case, there remains the undisputable fact that for all his greatness as a military commander, Montgomery did have serious shortcomings which could not be attributed to a lack of professional ability. So Montgomery did some jacked up things, and we covered it in one of the earlier podcasts. We also covered it on a podcast not about this book. These lapses were an inability to get along with many of his military colleagues. Like Kitchener, he had a knack of making himself enormously unpopular with his contemporaries and preferred the company of younger and more junior officers. It was a bad sign. I was talking about this on the Academy the other day, extremeownership.com. Somebody was talking about how they can't get along. If you're not getting along with people, you're doing a bad job. Well, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you getting along with people? You should be getting along with people. It's part of your job. Build relationships. What's happening with you? Montgomery's second shortcoming was that he sometimes allowed his own desire for personal glory to influence planning. A military plan tainted by an attempt to satisfy the commander's ego is unlikely to be the best plan. An irrelevant factor has been introduced into the calculation. Clearly, that's jacked up. Montgomery's next shortcoming presents something of a paradox. It concerns a matter of communication. For a man who is adept at simplifying the apparently complex, whose ability to extract the essentials from a host of irrelevant factors was second to none, who could communicate his intentions and issue orders to his subordinates with a lucidity that left no room for misinterpretation, and who could write his memoirs with such a style that puts most generals to shame, it is extraordinary that he should have been almost incapable of explaining himself to those above him in the chain of command. Kind of crazy. Got a whole big explanation on Montgomery and where some of that stuff came from. Fast forward a little bit to Kitchener. Kitchener, who became Secretary of State in the First World War, had, according to Philip Magnus, two basic attributes: an unparalleled thoroughness and an unparalleled drive. He was an individualist of great conceptions, whose hard and selfless nature was capable at times of kindness, sympathy, and even affection. These traits, his excessive drive, Lord Curzon once described Kitchener as this molten mass of devouring energy. His individualism and his refusal to conform, the originality of his thinking, and the occasional flashes of underlying warmth and generosity are hard to reconcile with the notion of authoritarianism. So he's got Montgomery, who has some authoritarianism. Kitchener's a little bit more authoritarianism. And as we push through his authoritarianism from Kitchener, for all his greatness, Kitchener seems to have been a victim of the repressive forces implanted in him as a child, presumably as a marionette of his father. And then psychoanalytics going on. But what were those traits, regardless of where they came from? His aloofness, his unpopularity with many of his fellow officers, his failure to work as part of a team, and most damaging of all, his latter-day indecisiveness and hesitancy in directing Gallipoli campaign must be ascribed to defects of the personality rather than intellect. And again, it's just interesting to point out that authoritarianism, you'd think that makes people make calls, but it actually freaks them out in these pressure situations because they don't want to get. They don't handle failure. They don't know what to do, and they don't want to do anything. Just back off. Whereas somebody that's a little less authoritarian is like, okay, you know what? We've got to make a call. Here, that's what we're doing. Now we get to Haig in trying to answer the question whether the recurring features of military incompetence derive from aspects of the authoritarian personality, even in a commander who ultimately emerged victorious. One cannot do better than consider the case of Douglas Haig, commander-in-chief of the British armies on the Western Front between 1915 and 1918. Judging from the war of words which has raged between his detractors and devotees, there was never a more controversial military commander. Here are some quotes. Haig, Britain's #1 war criminal, expected Germans to advance in this attack and at the same slow pace of his own clumsily planned results. Another quote, he seemed to be most highly equipped thinker in the British Army. That's totally different quote. Another quote, Haig perhaps failed to see that a dead man cannot advance and that to replace him is only to provide another corpse. Here's another quote. "It is indeed strange that the man whose stubbornness in the offensive had all but ruined us on the Somme should from August 1918 onwards have become the driving force of the Allied armies." That is crazy. You freaking conduct this horrible operation, so many people die, and you just continue being in charge and directing operations. Haig was unimaginative. Maybe he was competent according to his lights, but these were dim. Confidence of divine approval appeared to satisfy him. Nothing can excuse the casualties of the Somme and Passchendaele. World War I, freaking nightmare. So what's up with his personality? Did Haig evince those character traits that are associated with authoritarianism? He certainly had most of them. For start, he was conservative, conventional, and in his attitude toward the French, ethnocentric. His diary and dispatches suggest he was unemotional and totally anti-introspective, i.e. not one to reflect upon his own motives. He was manifestly lacking in compassion towards his fellow men. It's just so important as you hear these things just to think, what do you think a military commander should be like, and what should a military commander actually be like? He was a confirmed believer in the direction of events by supernatural powers and reserved to the point of being verbally almost inarticulate. Haig also betrayed that triad of traits which, according to contemporary research, defines the obsessive character and is correlated with authoritarianism. He was obstinate, orderly, and mean. About his obstinacy, little further need to be said. From the beginning to the end, his handling of the Third Ypres betokened an obstinacy of statuesque proportions. This guy was just stubborn, never changed his mind. We're sticking with the plan. For the second trait, in his dress, habits, and appearance, Haig was immaculate, orderly, and quite probably the cleanest man on the Western Front. A contemporary of his at Clifton remembered him particularly for his cleanliness, a remarkable attribute to be recalled of a fellow schoolboy. And for an example of his love of bull, there's this excerpt from a cavalryman's letter. Quote, "He had a personal escort consisting of a full troop of his own regiment. They were easily the smartest thing in France, not a buckle out of place, stripes of gold for the NCOs, great silver skull and crossbones," end quote. Other writers have commented on his meticulous attention to minute detail and his habit of planning each day according to a set pattern. So there you go. And he breaks out basically saying Montgomery, out of those three, was the best and had the least authoritarian nature. Kitchener, a little bit more authoritarian, a little bit worse performance. And then finally you get to Haig, total authoritarian attitude. And, well, the worst example and the worst leader. And now we're getting to the final chapter of this book. 6 podcast deeps, by the way.
Yes.
I went hard in the paint.
Amen.
Retreat, this one's called. "Hail, ye indomitable heroes, hail. Despite all of your generals, ye prevail." That's from a Landor, who wrote a poem about the Crimean heroes. And I just was talking about this, right? The Brits won. The Brits and their allies beat the Russian despite their shitty leadership. Clausewitz, "This difficulty in seeing things correctly, which is one of the greatest sources of friction in war, makes things appear quite different from what was expected." Good job, Clausewitz. You know what you better learn how to do if you want to see things correctly? You better learn to detach. You better learn to take a step back. You better learn to put your ego in check. You better learn to get control over your emotions so you're not seeing through an egotistical or emotional lens. "It is not the intention to leave a comparable impression of generalship, but rather to show that the nature of interspecies aggression predisposes the leaders of armies and navies to certain sorts of error." So he's saying, look, when you start fighting and killing each other, it leads to certain types of error, just in its own right. Then he says, far from diminishing the stature of senior military commanders, the existence of this predisposition makes the performance of the majority of soldiers and sailors doubly credible. So there's so much natural disaster about to happen that when someone does a good job, you should get double credit, 2 gold stars for being able to pull it off when there's all this natural gravity towards chaos, mayhem, destruction, ego, authoritarian personalities, like all that stuff is going on. And yet some people, most military people from the bottom to the top, do a good job and overcome that. So you should get double the credit. The theory, and this is all kind of a conclusion here, the theory advanced in this book starts from the position that by its very nature, military incompetence cannot be attributed to the dullness of intellect. We've hammered that point home. There is, it seems, a reoccurring pattern to military mishaps which defies any explanation in terms of the bloody fool theory. So these people aren't stupid. It is, in its stead, is tentatively suggested that the syndrome occurs through the enormous difficulties of professionalizing the instinctual activity of intraspecies aggression. This professionalism entails the growth of militarism, that collection of rules and conventions whereby hostility is controlled and anxiety reduced. So you've got this system set up to put command in place to reduce anxiety, to overcome some natural instincts. That's what the military is set up to do. Not surprisingly, a military career attracts a minority of people with these sort of anxieties within a military organization. Their neurotic needs are gratified. They, for their part, help to reinforce those very aspects of militarism which are so congeal to their requirements. In return, as it were, for fitting in so well, they may rise to positions of considerable power. Once there, however, they become incapacitated by the very characteristics which hasten to their ascent. You come in, you're authoritarian, you love it. You come in because you're authoritarian and you want to fit into that. Then you get in there and you're gratified because of that, and you're advanced because you're authoritarian. And if you make it all the way up the chain of command, the very authoritarian traits that you have are actually a disaster. So this is a horrible thing. And it took me 6 podcasts to get that out. Sorry. So much for a theory based on past history. Has it, and he kind of goes like, hey, look, I've showed you all these examples, which this book, 450 pages of this book is examples. But he says, so much for this theory based on a past history. Has it any relevance for the future? Since armies and navies have changed out of all recognition, perhaps the sorts of military incompetence described in these pages are no longer likely to occur. In fact, the evidence suggests this to be a forlorn hope. So this shit still happens. Some of the same sorts of mistakes occur now as blighted the lives of soldiers 100 years ago. In Vietnam, in 3 weeks, in 1968, the Tet Offensive alone cost the Americans 500 dead and the South Vietnamese 165,000 dead with 2 million refugees. Why did it happen? One reason was the inability to respond to unexpected military intelligence. Fast forward a little bit. Any doubts as to whether the 3 factors of remote control? He goes into a thing explaining how some of the changes that have taken place. One of them is remote control, meaning we now have radios. We can micromanage people out on the battlefield. We make these big swollen staffs and all kinds of weaponry. Like, has this helped? Now, do we have multiple people on a staff? Maybe they can help sort through some of these people that are incompetent. Or we have the power to see what's happening on the battlefield. Maybe we can make adjustments through remote control. And we've got all these resources and weapons. Maybe that helps. So here's what he said. Doesn't help. And he says, any doubts to whether these 3 factors from remote control, swollen staffs, and a wealth of resources make for incompetence are removed by the contemplation of Vietnam. In this most ill-conceived and horrible of wars, there was the commander-in-chief, Lyndon Johnson, aided by his advisors, dreaming up policies and even selecting targets at a nice safe distance of 12,000 miles. And there was the man on the spot, General Westmoreland, a by no means unintelligent military commander, but bemused by the sheer weight of destructive energy and aggressive notions supplied by his president. Together, the Machiavellian mind of the one, coupled with the traditional military mind of the other, produced a pattern of martial lunacy, so abject and appalling that it eventually did for both of them. Like the Boer leaders a half century earlier, the versatile General Giap, this is the North Vietnamese commander, and his commander-in-chief, a little old man with a wispy beard, Ho Chi Minh, made a huge, professionally trained and over-equipped army of their enemies look utterly ridiculous and their leaders helplessly irate, unfettered by traditional militarism, lacking in excessive brute force, and without an obsession with capturing real estate. Ho and Giap relied on poor men's strategy, surprise, deception, and the ability to melt away. They relied on the fact that Westmoreland would expend his energies swatting wherever they had last been heard of while they got ready to sting him somewhere else. Yeah, and it's one of the most fascinating thing. And when we covered General Mao's like little red book, one thing that's so fascinating about this is what the communists do to win wars is utilize decentralized command, and they do it great. And then for the way they run their government, they decide to make it authoritarian and centralized, which is crazy. Which is crazy. And that's exactly what that spells out right there. When we're in battle, decentralized command, make things happen, small units out there acting independently with freedom. And then, well, for the government, guess what? We're going to lock it all down. You're going to obey, obey, obey. This brings up yet another hazard of modern war, government by committee. Take the decision to invade Cuba with a group of Cuban exiles, Bay of Pigs. In approving the CIA plan, Kennedy and his advisors made 6 assumptions. Each was wrong. They assumed that no one would guess the U.S. government was responsible for the invasion. In their contempt for the Cuban Air Force, they assumed it would be annihilated before the invasion began. They assumed that the small invasion force led by unpopular ex-officers from the Batista regime would be more than a match for Castro's, quote, weak army of 20,000 well-equipped Cuban troops. They assumed that the invasion would touch off a general revolt behind Castro's line. They assumed that even if unsuccessful in their primary objective, the exile force could hole up in Cuba and reinforce anti-Castro guerrillas. That's their plan. Do assumption. In the event each assumption proved a gross miscalculation. Nothing went as planned. Nobody believed the CIA cover story. The ships carrying reserve ammunition for the invasion force failed to arrive. 2 were sunk and 2 fled. By the second day, and the invaders were surrounded by Castro's army, and by the third day, they were either dead or behind bars. 7 months later, the United States recovered what was left of their invasion force for a ransom priced to Castro of $53 million. Kennedy was stricken. How could I have been so stupid as to let them go ahead, he asked. As Sorensen wrote, his anguish was doubly deepened by the knowledge that the rest of the world was asking the same question. Arthur Schlesinger Jr. noted that Kennedy would sometimes refer incredulously to the Bay of Pigs, wondering how a rational and responsible government could have become involved in so an ill-starred adventure. Sunday, December 7th, 1941, had been set aside by Admiral Kimmel, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, for a friendly game of golf with his colleague, General Short. 96 of his ships of the American fleet slept at anchor in the harbor. American plane stood wingtip to wingtip on the tarmac. American servicemen were off duty enjoying weekend leave. By the end of the day, Pearl Harbor, with its ships, planes, and military installations, had been reduced to smoking ruins. 2,000 servicemen had been killed, and many more wounded or missing. By the end of the day, Kimmel was offering to resign. Later, he was court-martialed, reprimanded, and demoted to a position where he was never again required to make decisions of any consequence. Pearl Harbor, like the Bay of Pigs, confirmed once again that military incompetence is more often a product of personality characteristics than of intellectual shortcomings. For these American disasters show very clearly that even combined intellects and specialized knowledge of highly intelligent and dedicated men are no proof against decisions so totally unrealistic, and subsequently to tax the credulity of even those who had made them. Far from diminishing the chances of ineptitude, the group actually accentuates the effects of those very traits which may lead to incompetence in individual commanders. So you get a group together, and you'd think that this would kind of cancel out, and I'd say, hey, Echo, I don't know if that's a good idea. No, it actually gets worse. It turns into groupthink. The symptoms of this process, which Janice terms groupthink, include 1. an illusion of invulnerability that becomes shared by most members of the group. 2, collective attempts to ignore or rationalize away items of information which might otherwise lead the group to reconsider shaky but cherished assumptions. 3, an unquestioned belief in the group's inherent morality, thus enabling members to overlook ethical consequences of their decision. 4, stereotyping the enemy as either too evil for negotiation or too stupid and feeble to be a threat. You can like hear this happening in the room, right? You can hear the discussions happening. A shared illusion of unanimity in a majority viewpoint augmented by the false assumption that silence means consent. And 6, self-appointed mind guards to protect the group from adverse information that might shatter complacency about the effectiveness and morality of their decisions. So that's what happens when you put a bunch of people that have these tendencies into a group together. It gets worse. And this is the last thing I'm going to read from the book here. Finally, it is worth noting that the personality-determined malaise of groupthink produces once again those 4 most frequently occurring symptoms of past military incompetence: wastage of manpower, overconfidence, underestimation of the enemy, and ignoring of intelligence reports. These, it seems, are the enduring hazards of professionalizing violence. And I can tell you these are not only the hazards of professionalizing violence, these are the enduring hazards for us as human beings, as leaders, that we can all fall into. And as you pointed out, this book is a big warning of what not to do. I said it was the last thing I'm going to read, but there's this guy's funny, sure. And I did a bad job of relaying some of his humor. Here's the afterword of this book. And then this is the last thing I'm going to read from this book after 6 podcasts.
Sure.
He says, this is so British. He says, lest the reader should have doubted my qualifications to write this book, let me assure him that I have marked authoritarian traits, a weak ego, fear of failure motivation, and no illusions about the fact that I would have made a grossly incompetent general. It takes one to know one. And that was from the author in 1975. So a little bit of humor. And, he says it takes one to know one. But that's unfortunately not true. It's unfortunately not true. If you think you're incompetent, there's a better chance that you're not incompetent. You can see where I'm going with this. If you think you're incompetent, there's a better chance that you're not incompetent. Because if you think you're incompetent, you're actually humble, and you're thinking, "Ooh, I need to listen to what other people have to say. I need to check myself. I need to learn. I need to open my mind and see what other information I can gather because I feel like I might be incompetent." Mm-hmm. So if you feel, it's kind of when people ask me about the imposter syndrome. Yeah. What about imposter syndrome? Good. That means you're actually thinking, man, do I even need to be? I always had that. I always felt like, oh, man, if I need to be making decisions, I better do my homework. Mm-hmm. I better think this through. I better pay attention. So if you think you're incompetent, you probably aren't. But if you've been listening to these 6 straight podcasts and you've been thinking that this book is about all the incompetent leaders around you, that's a little warning sign. Mm-hmm. Be careful, because if you are in that mindset where you think, oh, man, I can't believe how jacked up all these other leaders are, but not you, red flag, because chances are this is about you. And look, here's the other red flag. It's a scale, right? You brought that up. It's a continuum. Yeah. And so all of us, even if you feel like you're pretty competent, you are under threat of being dragged to incompetency. Yeah. So this book is just a warning sign after warning sign after warning sign. And by the way, it's nothing new. Yeah. There's almost nothing new. There's one thing that I said that's a new thought to me. I forget what it was. But in these 400 pages and whatever we just did 12, 15 hours worth of podcasts, it's a rehash. It's a reinforcement of information that I already knew, that we already knew, that we talk about all the time, that we've seen in a bunch of other situations. It's a rehash, but we're all getting, we can all get pulled over there. We can get pulled towards that authoritarian mindset. And you know why we get pulled towards the authoritarian mindset? We get pulled towards that authoritarian mindset because it seems easier.
Yeah.
It seems easier to say, shut up and do what I told you to do.
Yeah.
It seems easier to say, you know what, I'm not going to listen to that piece of information.
Right.
It seems easier to do that. It seems like the right move.
Yeah.
It seems easier to say, you know what, the competitor's never going to be able to do what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
It seems easier, and it's not. So you got to get watched. You got to watch out. You got to pay attention. You got to be careful. We all have to be on guard. Incompetence. Incompetence is out there sort of ready to attack.
It's ready.
It's ready to attack.
Yes, sir.
And if you're not on guard, it'll grab you, it'll pull you down, and you'll be making bad decisions and getting people killed or ruining your business or ruining your marriage or ruining your life through incompetence. So we have to pay attention. You got to be careful.
It's true.
We got to stay on the path.
Yes, sir. The path.
Speaking of which, what do you got for us? How do you advise we avoid incompetence?
Incompetence.
Mental incompetence, leadership incompetence, physical incompetence.
Well, yeah.
We don't want to have that. What do you got for us? Echo Charles.
That was the, the Dunning-Kruger effect, right, that you kind of referred to, where the it takes one to know one that's not necessarily true. Yeah, it feels like when you think you know everything, it's like it's easy to know everything when you think there's only like 3 or 4 things to know.
Yeah.
But then
when you start jiu-jitsu and you're like, man, once I know how to stop that arm lock, I'll be good.
Kind of be, yeah.
Yeah. Because you got arm lock 3 times by some random, blue belt, and you're like, oh, dude, I'm going to stop that. And then you get choked.
Figured it out.
Then you learn how to stop the choke. Then you get heel hooked.
Yeah, Dave.
You learn how to stop that heel hook. Yeah, it just goes on.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop.
Yeah, so the guy
actually it does stop after like you get heel hooked, arm locked, Ezekiel choked, freaking, then you go, oh, there's a lot more. I don't know what I'm doing.
Yes. So it
takes a minute to convince you of that.
Yeah. So that's when you it's all the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Mm-hmm.
It's essentially like, when you think people who are like so confident, they're the ones that know less than the people who are like not confident at all because they know how much there is not to know. Almost, they have a grasp on it or whatever. Yeah. Dave, good deal, Dave, said something, I forget his exact words, but I wish I remembered it. It was something like, oh yeah, when he's talking about jiu-jitsu, he was like, it's almost like you get you learn, what do you say? It's almost like you get worse over time because yesterday there was only 3 things I didn't know. Like now there's like 40 things I don't know kind of thing.
And tomorrow there's 1,000 things. And the day that you start to feel okay is when you go, oh, there's an infinite number of things I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
I just don't know anything.
Yeah. Exactly right.
Well, so we want to know stuff.
Hey, complacency, right? Complacency, that's one of the deals. It's like your whole brain and body, but brain trying to like be lazy, for lack of a better term, like I said before. Trying to save energy, trying to save work. Like, what are you going to do? More work or less work?
Yep.
See what I'm saying? It's like a Rubik's Cube. Are you good at Rubik's Cube?
Yeah.
You are.
Yeah, I can.
You know the formula.
Yep, I know all the algorithms to get the sides turned up right.
That's good. Well, let's say you didn't. Well, actually, now
I'm just kidding, bro. I don't know how to do Rubik's
Cube. That kind of surprised me when I was like, "Damn, okay, all right." That's like if you said you knew how to play the piano.
But it is an algorithm that you learn how to do stuff.
It's like a little language for sure.
A little steps.
Yes, exactly right. Like it's a little formula for sure. But whether you know the formula or not, I would imagine that, let's say you got that thing figured out, right? But then on one side, you got that one freaking different color on the side, just the one. You know that's not just one move. That's like, 1,800 moves you got to do.
No, not. There's like...
Oh,
the
formula now.
There's like 13 moves. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah. Left, up, 2, 5.
I would imagine it'd be like multiples of 4 for some reason. I don't know why I think that, but
could be right, could be wrong. Here's the deal. Let me ask you this: I was the kid when Rubik's Cube came out, it took me like no less than 15 minutes to figure out how to break that thing apart and reassemble it in the correct order.
Yeah, and then actually that's smart to do in a couple. It's creative. Put it this way.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Well, yours might. I'm not saying you were creative because I don't know, but you seem like the type. You didn't do it out of creativity. You did it just out of like brute fucking Jocko-ness. But when you break
I cannot deny that I used brute Jocko-ness against the Rubik's Cube.
Just like, hey, I'm going to solve this problem the most direct way I can. But if you look at those Rubik's Cube, you take it all apart. The last pieces, those center pieces, kind of tell a little bit of a story.
Yeah,
see what I'm saying?
They're stuck there.
Well, no, I think you can take them out.
You could pop them off,
it's like this little
why
star
would you
thing.
do that?
Yeah, it would make less sense. Exactly right. That's what I'm saying. It tells a little story there. So you're like, oh, I see. Then maybe I don't know what you do to them. Put them back together. Here's another way to do it. All the colors are little stickers.
Oh God.
Yeah. Less brute way of doing it, a little bit more sophisticated is what I'm saying.
I don't know until you got like glue all over your freaking hands.
I didn't say it was perfect. I didn't say it was perfect. Either way, that's the frustration. You got it all figured out.
People do
except
Rubik's
for like
Cubes in seconds, by the way.
Oh yeah, bro. You ever seen those freaking? So Rubik's Cube is what? It's 9 on each side, right? Bro, you ever seen those ones with like freaking like 64 squares on each side or whatever?
I have not seen that.
They're nuts, and guys will do them too. In like time lapse or whatever. Nonetheless, you see my point.
No, I have no idea what your
point is.
Where
you think you got things figured out in life, right? Then you get this one lone idea that kind of jams up your whole way of thinking. Just that one. It's way easier to take off that sticker, or maybe just turn it to the side where you can't see that thing. See what I'm saying? It's way easier.
Okay.
Save way more energy. But the reality is, the correct thing to do is, bro, you got to know that algorithm, the formula. It's going to take some steps and take some more work, but at the end of the day, you're going to have it correct. That's what I think.
Okay.
See what I'm saying?
Yes, 100%, bro.
And that's the way you got to think in a way. So
amazing.
Like, see, even your attitude right now is telling me that you might be feeling the effects of the what do you call it? Well, how'd you put it? Like slipping off the path.
My mind is so close to your freaking metaphors right now. It's ridiculous.
Anyway, we're working out. It's squat season, by the way. I heard. Apparently, it's squat season.
We're back into squat season.
So we're on the path of staying there. Hey, look, the beginning of squat season, the beginning of any physical related season, if there's any more than squat season, it's gonna be painful, especially in the beginning.
Doms.
If you go snowboarding, the first day of snowboarding season, that day you're gonna have DOMs. You can be sore. See what I'm saying? Anyway, my point is you're gonna need some supplementation here and there. It's no problem. We got some for you. Jocko has some for you. Jocko Fuel.
That was a long ramp.
Let's start with the energy drinks. See, this is not seasonal. This is year round. Yep. Energy drink. See what I'm saying? But not the traditional energy drink. This is a healthy energy drink. Energy health drink. Whatever you want to call it. All upside, no downside. All healthy for you. You'll be healthier after you drink one or two. See what I'm saying?
Yep. By the way, there's a new pre-workout powder formula, which JP Donnell did 2 dry scoops and did the chaser of the sour apple sniper. Yeah. But I was talking to my daughter today, and she just did her first experience on the new powder, the new Go powder. And while I was talking to her, she was on the rower, getting that C2, getting that pulling some chain out. Get that chain out.
Yes, sir.
And she was saying, as she, in between breaths, that I wasn't even going to row today, but I took the Go. It freaking hit.
And that is a real thing.
That's a real thing.
It hits, yeah. So, and I mentioned this before offline, where I'm no stranger to the jittery pre-workout powders. Like I'm not scared of that kind of stuff. And in fact, you get the jitters or whatever, all that stuff. To me, that's no factor. And in fact, when you're like tired and the jitters hit you, I'd rather have jitters and then be fired up to work out than not have jitters and not be fired up to work out. Right. So I'm not scared of that kind of stuff. Right.
Are jitters necessary though? That's the thing. It seems like we've discovered that we don't need them.
I didn't even think about that stuff. To me, that's just what the pre-workout was. Good. I'll take all of it. Whatever. But It is, and I realize this because I heard people say like, "Oh yeah, you drink this like tea." They'd say this about some teas, like, "Yeah, you're up, but it's like a smooth or whatever, the smoothness or whatever." I'm like, "Cool, man, smoothness, all good, whatever." It just wasn't part of my world until I got the experience. So the pre-workout, I took it. I'm like, cool. The thing is, I haven't been doing pre-workout for like years now. So I took this one. I was like, cool, no jitters. So I'm thinking, maybe Jocko's just sort of scared of the pre-workout experience. I get it, a little bit more mild. I get it, man. I get it. But when you start warming up, that's when you feel it. Like that, when everything starts flowing, it's like it connects your brain to your freaking body more or something.
That's out of body experience.
No, an in-body experience. Nonetheless, what I'm saying is, what your daughter was talking about, I understand, and it's true. And yeah, I think I had to evaluate my whole standard of the pre-workout because I knew like the pre-workouts that I was taking, that's not good. That's why I stopped. Yeah. Because I'm like, cool, it's working, but bro, I know I'm jamming myself up, my heart. I don't know what I'm jamming up on the inside, but I'm jamming something up. And yeah, man, now I know the new standard. See what I'm saying?
So you can get that. You can get your super hard workouts with a little extra kick.
Yes, sir.
Which might mean you need to protect yourself from a joint perspective a little bit more. Yeah. Let's go joint warfare. Let's go super krill. Yes, sir. Might as well keep your immunity in check because we're starting to work hard, getting like needing recovery. Oh yeah. Maybe the immune system's taking a little hit. We'll get a little boost from some Cold War, some vitamin D3. Kind of got you covered.
Yeah, when you kind of like go down the list, you kind of like it's a whole system, really, and it's not the kind like I don't want to say useless because I don't want to like put that kind of stigma on other types of supplements, but it's like a whole system to stay very solidly like on the path. Yeah.
And then you get on them because we know we're kind of in squat season apparently. Hell yeah. But then you can be in squat season, which means you might want to get on board the milk train.
Yes, sir.
Because you're gonna need to build.
Oh yeah.
From your activities.
Oh yeah.
Squat-tivities.
So squat-tivities. Hell yeah. I ate 2 steaks the other day.
Concurrently, like why?
Yeah, in one meal. 2 steaks, brown rice.
Because why wouldn't you just have one big steak?
They were 2 medium steaks.
Okay.
I don't know. That's the size you buy at the store.
Okay. Okay. Got it. Yeah.
I mean, maybe I could have went to the butcher.
Yeah.
And give me that didn't happen.
Right. Jocko. How many ounces were you thinking?
What's the medium regular one? You have the thin one, the ribeyes, right? You have the thin ribeyes. Okay. Then you have those super fat ones that you get from the guy behind the counter, and then you have the regular medium ones.
Okay.
Right?
You had 2 of those.
2 of the mediums, yes. Okay. Yes. Which was a lot. Normally, I just have 1. So I'm like, cool. I needed some additional protein. That's why. Yeah. Came home late, didn't eat all day. I was only having 1 meal, so I had to double up on the protein. Had to. Mm-hmm. See what I'm saying? Brown rice. But can't be doing that every day. See what I'm saying? I'm just saying it's not convenient.
Yeah. And also, let's face it, when you get done, you still, or at least even with Los Dos ribeyes, I can still get done with 2 ribeyes, marbled, tasty, good to go.
Marbled to perfection.
Yeah. And you can still get done. I can still get done and want to have dessert.
Yes, sir.
Now, what am I going to have for dessert? Could I have something that negates my physical progress? I could. Or I could just have milk.
Yeah, that's one more step forward even.
Oh, man. Good. Once it hits the lips, bro. It's so good. It's so good.
Thank you, Jocko, for the lips thing.
So that's from a movie. You should have picked up on that. You not pick up on that?
No, bro. All I got is the imagery of your lips.
That's Frank the Tank, man. In what movie is it, K-Dog?
Old School.
Old School. Yeah. He's talking about beer, like a beer funnel. What is it called? A beer funnel? Is that right?
Beer
bong. Beer bong. Yeah, beer bong. It's so good. Once it hits the lips, it's kind of like milk. It's the same feeling. It's so good. Once it hits the lips, you just...
Yes, sir. Same thing. I understand fully. You ever eat bison ribeye?
Yeah.
Did I ask you that already?
Oh, yeah.
Bro, I think that's the new thing. You get a grass-fed bison ribeye, smaller, but... Bro, it's kind of legit.
Well, actually, the thing, over at other people's houses right now is actually elk.
All right.
Yeah,
all right.
That's right.
Yeah, elk is good. I had some,
out there just, elk, you know exactly where it came from.
Just elking it up. Huh?
Yep.
All right. Good.
You were there at the moment of truth.
Yeah, did it. Good. Yes. So, in the event of you not having elk in your freezer, as the case may be, from your hunt, as the case may be, or double ribeyes at any given moment, or bison steak.
Right.
You want some additional protein? Smoke Train all day.
Smoke Train. Hey, you can get all this stuff at jockofuel.com if you subscribe to it. The shipping's free. You can get the drinks at Wawa.
Yes, sir.
You can get all of it at Vitamin Shop. We appreciate those stores carrying this stuff because, look, you might want to roll in there.
Yeah.
Roll in there. Roll in a Wawa. Get yourself a hoagie and a go.
I didn't really know what a hoagie was, by the way.
Yeah.
Is that an East Coast thing or what?
Yes.
Hoagie.
There's a whole bunch of names for that particular Subway sandwich.
Sub sandwich.
Sub sandwich. What we used to call it where I'm from, grinder. Have you ever heard that before? It would be called a grinder.
It's not ringing a bell.
My wife, who's from England, would call it a BAP. B-A-P.
I for sure have not heard that.
Yep. So there's some other ones I think we're missing. Oh, po' boy.
Yeah,
Po' boy.
I heard that.
That's
before.
another one. So there's some names out there.
All right, hoagie.
Yep.
All day.
Meanwhile,
Also, Origin USA. This is American-made stuff. Look, our health is together. We know that already. We're staying on the path. It's not. Don't get complacent on the path. We're staying on the path, right?
Yep.
Look, you want as far as apparel goes, we all wear clothes. Hopefully, well, maybe we wear clothes. Yeah. We'll say that. Let's just say that.
We are wearing clothes.
Look, we want some iconic American-made attire: denim jeans, boots, some shirts. Some other leather wallets, belts, this kind of stuff. What if it was all made in America?
Oh, it is. Origin USA. By the way, but you want that bison steak? Cool. How about the bison boots?
Well, boom. Yeah, there you go. Boom. Oh, yeah. Made in America.
Supple leather. Have you ever heard me use the term supple before? Probably
I think
not.
I did one time, and it was very uncomfortable.
Yeah. I'm going to use it again right now, describing some bison boots, which are supple.
All right, there you go.
Freaking
you heard it here, folks.
Go.
But yes, everything made in America from the materials, the raw materials grown in America. Yeah. Everything, all the way up to the jeans you wearing on your hips.
And so you're good 24 hours a day because you got also, because we're training jiu-jitsu, you got your jiu-jitsu gi. You got a rift gi. You're never going to get another kind of gi again.
Oh, yeah. So the whole system is accounted for right here. See what I'm saying?
Just in the game.
It's true. OriginUSA.com. Also, Jocko has a store. So now you want to go into straight up representing on the path, like a conscious choice to represent.
Right. Is there a psychological hit that you get when you were a little kid? You got new sneakers.
Yes, sir.
You're running a little bit faster.
Yes, sir.
We're on the path. We put on a freaking T-shirt that says "Discipline equals freedom."
Yep.
Do we go a little bit harder in the paint?
Yes, we do. And here's the thing: that sounds like, oh, that's kind of like funny or what, right? It's absolutely true. And here's the thing: do an experiment, a scientific. wear a shirt or hoodie or whatever says "Discipline equals freedom." Look in the mirror and eat a cookie. See how? I'm not saying you're not gonna be able to eat the cookies. I'm not saying that.
It's going to be harder for sure.
It's going to be way harder, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So now if you're just in your everyday life, but you're representing, but the chances of you slipping off the path, even for that moment.
I actually feel bad we haven't put this word out before because this is important, as you like to say. It is kind of important.
It is. Yes, sir. It's true. It's absolutely true. So it just sort of applies. Like if you're just representing in general, it's just that much more efficient way of staying on the path. That's what I'm saying. And let's face it, you see somebody else representing, you're representing, there's the cohesion.
Yeah.
Bro.
Now we're even stronger together.
Also, the shirt locker. This is a part of Jocko's store. It's a part. Choose to sign up for Shirt Locker. You get a new shirt every month with, did you change the word? Creative designs? You said something
else.
Well,
now they're actually badass because the new one that just came out is... And it's new. It's like a new scenario.
It is.
It's a tank.
Yep.
There's kettlebells flying off, which I noticed.
Yeah, you did run into the kettlebells.
There's kettlebells like flying through the air.
Yep.
I'm riding this tank sort of in an aggressive, hostile kind of way, wearing a deathcore t-shirt, which I'm wearing right now, by the way. Maybe I just dismounted my tank and showed up here to do this podcast.
Two machine guns. And the tank is an M1 Abrams tank, by the way.
Yeah.
So very good depiction.
But it looks like a comic book thing. That's what made it. It's kind of a dope thing.
Yep, it's true.
I commend your work there. Commended.
The bad news is, that was last month's shirt or this past month's shirt. The good news is when you're signed up for Shirt Logger, I don't care if you sign up next year, you can still get that shirt if you want. You have access to that shirt if you signed up. So, boom, no worries. Anyway, yeah, jockostore.com. You want to represent? Boom, that's where you can get the stuff to represent.
Speaking of subscription, subscribe to this podcast. Don't forget about Unraveling Podcast, Grounded Podcast, Warrior Kid Podcast. I got asked by kids at Jocko Live, which, by the way, is Jocko Live in Austin.
Yep, coming up.
Saturday night.
Yes, sir.
Austin, Texas, November 20th. So if you want to come to that and ask me questions or hang out or listen to me talk, come check that out. But also Warrior Kid Podcast. We also have Jocko Underground, which, again, we have contingency plans. Mm-hmm. We were recently shadow banned. Shadow banned.
Straight up.
Yep, we got shadow banned on Instagram. You know, people going, why'd you get shadow banned? That's the problem. We don't know why. We have some suspicions. We're going to talk about it on the Underground. Mm-hmm. I'm going to explain the reasons why I think the shadow ban might have come. I've been unshadow banned now, apparently. Mm-hmm. We have information. We do have information. We got troopers in let's just say, we have placement, access, something we call access and placement. Cool. We have people. Mm-hmm. So we will hopefully not let that happen again. But look, it can happen. Mm-hmm. And that's why we made Jocko Underground, in case mayhem happens, in case we get locked down. We don't control these platforms that you're listening to this on. We do control JockoUnderground.com. If you want to help support us, it costs $8.18 a month. Because we appreciate that support, to have that contingency plan set up, we make an extra podcast, Jocko Underground. We talk about other subjects adjacent to this. The one that's about to come out is actually explaining why I think I got shadow banned and a little behind the information. So you can check that out if you want. Go to JockoUnderground.com. If you can't afford it, you're still with us. Mm-hmm. If you can't afford that $8.18 a month, just email assistance@JockoUnderground.com and we'll get you access to it. We have a YouTube channel. You can subscribe to that. Subscribe to Origin USA YouTube channel for some behind the scenes. We got an album called Psychological Warfare. If you need a little help in a moment of weakness. Mm-hmm. And look, we could make an album where you have a moment of weakness and you press the track. Mm-hmm. And it's Echo talking about a Rubik's Cube for 15 minutes with no logical meaning behind it.
That part's incorrect. Very much logic, yes.
But we didn't do that. Maybe we'll do that at some point. Okay. People that have more time to overcome their weakness. But if you want to get that, go to wherever you get MP3s. You can get Psychological Warfare. I am the artist. Yep. Because it says artist's name. Jocko. Yeah. So there you go. Boom. Flipside Canvas. Dakota Meyer making just awesome stuff. He started a distribution company, by the way. He's now in Texas. I'm investing in his beverage distribution company. He started going out proactively delivering Jocko Go to various stores, and now he's got people ordering it.
Bro, that's an anti-authoritarianistic mind.
Dude, it's freaking Dakota Meyer.
Do it my way.
He's going to make things happen. He doesn't make it happen. Whatever. Who's in what? There's someone in the way? Cool. I just outmaneuvered them. Yeah. Oh, there's some distribution company that didn't want to make the connections. Oh, cool. Dakota Meyer just in a truck. Making it happen. I think he signed up 40 stores right now.
My man.
Well, hey, what's going on? Oh, I'll figure this out, make it happen. So there you go. He's also selling stuff to hang on your wall. Flipsidecanvas.com. Go and order something cool there. Mm-hmm. Got some books. Final Spin. It's out right now. We don't even know what it is. Novel, poem. We know that it brings tears to JP Donnell. JP Donnell crying in the plane, crying in public. Check that out. Leadership Strategy and Tactics Field Manual. Code, Evaluation, and Protocol. Discipline Equals Freedom Field Manual. Way of the Warrior Kid 1, 2, 3, 4. Get the freaking books for your kids or kids that you know. It's sort of, if you have the ability to get those books for some kid that you know and you don't, you're not a good person. You're not a good person. Straight up. If you know a kid and you don't get them those books, you're hurting those kids. This is factual. So whatever. I know I've met some really cool people lately. I met someone down at the muster, jiu-jitsu player. Sure. He's like, oh yeah, I carry Way of the Warrior Kid in my bag. Yeah. Any kid that I meet, they're getting it. He's just helping kids worldwide. So do that. Put it in your bag, carry it around. You see a kid, you go, hey kid, here you go. Imagine that. You can influence the rest of someone's life by doing that. So, Way the Warrior Kid 1, 2, and 3, Mikey and the Dragons. Apparently the best. What age group is that? Little kids.
Yeah.
What do you call them? Little kids.
Like post-toddler. I don't know what they're called.
That age group. Picture book level.
Yeah.
Yep. Mikey and the Dragons. Get kids to overcome fear. Hackworth, About Face. Wrote the foreword to that. What an honor. And then, of course, Extreme Ownership and the Dichotomy of Leadership. And we have Echelon Front, Leadership Consultancy. Myself and my brother, Leif Babin. We started that. Now we got a big team of people. And what we do is solve problems through leadership. The solution is leadership. Whatever's going on in your organization, the solution is leadership. Go to echelonfront.com for details on that. You can also check out some of our live events, the muster, field training exercises, EF Battlefield. Next muster is Dallas, Texas, March 24th and 25th. We got Jocko live in Austin. Saturday night, November 20th. Come and check it out. We have online training, Extreme Ownership Academy. You do not learn any of this stuff overnight. You have to train in it just like jiu-jitsu, just like playing guitar, just like shooting basketball. You need to train continually. Go to extremeownership.com to get your leadership skills honed. And if you want to help service members, active and retired, their families, Gold Star families, Mark Lee's mom, Mama Lee, she's got a charity organization. If you want to donate or you want to get involved, go to americasmightywarriors.org. And if you want more of my excruciating explanations or you need more of Echo's convoluted connections to Rubik's Cubes. Well, Echo is at Echo Charles. I am at Jocko Willink. And to all the troops out there around the world standing watch, keeping us safe, thank you for your service and sacrifice. And to our police and law enforcement, firefighters, paramedics, EMTs, dispatchers, correctional officers, border patrol, Secret Service, and all first responders, thank you for your service here at home to keep us safe. And to everyone else out there, maybe ask yourself that question if you are possibly incompetent. And I hope you're not. But how do you avoid being incompetent? Number one lesson from this book, it's something that we talk about all the time. Be humble. Listen. Don't think you know everything. Because you don't. Be humble. Keep an open mind. The thing that traps your mind, is your mind. So pry it open. Keep it open. And go get after it. And until next time, this is Echo and Jocko. Out.